Chapter 908. Gudatsi and Matthew whispered to each other about Wuming's unconsciousness. Regarding the Uruk Hyunryong's lack of awareness of his own power, I've recorded this as well as the previous incident where his servant was killed by his own skill. Although Roman was stunned when they were talking about Okitasoki, he still recorded everything that should be recorded. Not to mention that this news was a miracle to the magic world. All the actions in the singularity had to be recorded in the database. I'm just telling the truth. However, the fact that I was able to eliminate a major monster commander so easily is probably because the other party underestimated me. Being able to withstand Wuming's multiple spells was indeed a testament to the strength of the major monster commander. Although Ulidim was dying after receiving Wuming's attack, it was not to be assumed that the major monster commander was not as powerful as imagined. First of all, Ulidim was tricked by Wuming. He did not even know that Wuming had activated his multiple spells. If Ulidim had been prepared, the outcome would have been uncertain. Second, the multiple spells that Wuming used on Ulidim could only be used in the wilderness. If it were in a city or a place with a lot of people, Wuming would definitely not dare to use this trick. Although the impact of multiple spells was not as great as the nuclear bombs in human society in the later period, it could still cause a certain amount of damage. The originally peaceful plateau had now been turned into a plateau basin by Wuming's attack. The range of this spell was too large. Not to mention the impact of earthquakes. If it was released in a city, it would be almost impossible for any human to survive. In short, this trick could not be used so easily in the future. Even if it did not affect humans, if there were earthquakes or something like that every day, humans would be scared half to death. How would they be able to fight major monsters then? For war, individual bravery was not the key. The easiest way was to rely on the soldiers at the bottom. Only when they had enough momentum and vigor could they fight a tough battle. However, once Wuming had too many concerns, the difficulty of dealing with major monster commanders would definitely increase. Especially after listening to some of the details of the major monster commanders provided by Merlin, Wuming had a deeper understanding of them. If it was a one-on-one battle, Wuming would not be afraid of any of the major monster commanders at the moment. However, if it was Wuming alone, it would be a little difficult for him to fight all the major monster commanders. Besides, he did not know the specific situation of Gorgon, who had been staying in the house all this time. Wuming's plan might fail. However, he couldn't put too much pressure on the magical beast. He had to learn to grasp the principle that going too far was as bad as falling short. He could not underestimate the enemy, nor could he pay too much attention to the enemy. This way, he could pay attention to the enemy without too much pressure and achieve the best result. One thing is clear now. Merlin, you deliberately exaggerated the current situation. It's obviously not to that extent yet. There should be a limit to your joke. Gudatsi and Matthew, who agreed with Wuming's words, nodded, and then looked at Merlin with indifferent eyes. I'm just trying to make everyone feel more threatened. Why are you treating me like a bad guy? Alas, it's hard to be a good person. Gudatsi and Matthew were a little moved by Merlin's words. Moreover, if Wuming did not know Merlin well, Wuming might have been deceived too. In short, although the major monsters are very powerful, our forces are not weak either. You don't need to worry about Anna. After all, that is the territory of the Quetzalcoatl. Thinking of the Quetzalcoatl who once showed him great respect, Wuming had to admit that as a god, that guy was completely qualified. Don't underestimate the Quetzalcoatl. With the Quetzalcoatl, unless Tiamat appears in person, the southern jungle will be a very safe place. Yes, we understand. Gudatsi and Matthew stood up and saluted Wuming, like primary school students who listened to their teacher. Then, let's go and head to the Temple of Abyff Mountain. Then, the four of them set off to climb Abyff Mountain. As they walked all the way up the mountain road, Matthew took the lead and asked, "By the way, is the goddess of Venus in the temple on this mountain?" Although Wuming did not make it clear who it was, just the word, goddess of Venus, basically exposed who they would meet next. Speaking of the goddess of Venus in Mesopotamia, I'm afraid only Ishtar is the goddess of Venus. Is she the mistress of the heavens? In Chaldea's control room, Roman sat in front of his seat, his hands constantly tapping on the keyboard. The screen in front of Roman also showed images that ordinary people could not understand. But Chaldea's instruments have detected that there are only 4 gods in Mesopotamia. What's going on? 4. Gudazi stopped. He didn't understand what was going on. The doctor is referring to the 4 gods, the goddess of warcraft, the Quetzalcoatl, the goddess of the underworld, and Senior Villo. The first 3 were the goddesses of the 3 Goddesses Alliance. Although Wuming did not say much, his spiritual base also belonged to the Uruk Hyunryong. But Assassin said that there is a goddess on this mountain. So, shouldn't there be 5 gods? Gudatsi subconsciously looked at the top of the mountain, where she could vaguely see the shadow of the temple. I'm also wondering about this. On the big screen in front of Roman, 5 dialogue boxes appeared. The goddess of warcraft, the Quetzalcoatl, the goddess of the underworld, and the Uruk Hyunryong each occupied a box, but the last box was a series of question marks. Is it possible that the divinity is not strong enough, so it can't be detected? Matthew asked. The leopard man they encountered before was also a god, but if they didn't encounter him, Chaldea's instruments couldn't detect his existence at all. Only gods with strong divinity like the goddess of warcraft and the Quetzalcoatl could be detected by Chaldea's instruments without contact. That's impossible. Ishtar is the mistress of the sky. Even if she is a pseudo-servant at the moment, her divinity can't be that weak. Wuming saw Ishtar the last time he came here. Although she came as a pseudo-servant in the form of a girl, her divinity didn't decrease much. She was still a very powerful divine servant. Oh? Another pseudo-servant. Gudatsi nodded. She always felt that she always encountered pseudo-servants. Although Ishtar is a pseudo-servant, she is much more powerful than the leopard man, Wuming added. At that moment the almighty Leonardo da Vinci spoke. Is it related to the goddess of the underworld? Chapter 909. What does this have to do with the goddess of the underworld? Gudatsi expressed that she really didn't know anything about the myths of the Mesopotamia region. The goddess of the underworld that Leonardo da Vinci refers to is an existence named Ereshkigal. She is known as the mistress of the underworld. In a sense, she is the half-body of the mistress of the heavens, Ishtar. Wuming explained to Gudatsi. He was also a Uruk Hyunryong. As a local, at least he knew more than Roman and the others. Since there is a legend of half-body, it naturally means that the two are different sides of the same pillar god. In this case, the goddess of the underworld and the loser goddess on this mountain should be considered the same pillar god. If they share the same divinity, it's normal that they can't be detected. If the goddess of the underworld is Ereshkigal, then this situation is true. Roman, who was sitting in Chaldea's seat, was constantly tapping on the keyboard, modifying the data of the singularity of Mesopotamia registered in Chaldea's database. It's very likely that, as Hyunryong said, Chaldea only detected the existence of 4 gods. Roman made the final confirmation. Although I don't have a good impression of that girl, even if she is a loser, she is still a goddess. If she joins us and signs a temporary contract with Tachika, it will be a big boost to our combat power. Wuming had this idea, which was why he dragged Gudatsi and Matthew to Mount Abiff. And in this way, even Gil won't say anything about you leaving the southern jungle without permission. After all, compared to getting the loser goddess to join us, it's unwise to let the loser goddess be a lone follower. After all, it was more reassuring to have an unstable element in one's hands than to let it go. How dare you say that? You bastard! The voice of a young girl filled with resentment entered the ears of everyone who had climbed halfway up the mountain. Master, it's a servant's reaction, please stand behind me. Matthew instantly opened his hand and conjured a shield. He stood in front of Gudatsi, protecting her behind him. In the face of unknown servants, the first thing to do was to protect their master. What's this reaction? Is it a god? Roman, who was in Chaldea, was shocked when he saw the results of the instrument. Ishtar, he said. Wuming looked up at the charming person sitting on the bow-like heavenly ship Anna in the sky. I didn't expect you to have the guts to look for me here, Hyun Ryong. Ishtar's resentment towards Wuming seemed to be particularly big, and Ishtar didn't seem to pay attention to anyone else. She only paid attention to Wuming. Vilo-senpai, what's going on? Matthew couldn't help but ask. From Ishtar's reaction, it was obvious that Wuming had provoked him, and it was not a light one. Don't ask me, even if you ask me, I don't have the impression of provoking this troublesome guy. Hey! Don't ignore me whispering there. Along with Ishtar's furious voice, a piercing sound came into everyone's ears. Whoosh! A golden flash of light shot straight towards Wuming. Vilo-senpai! Assassin! Matthew and Gudatsi couldn't help but shout. Clank! And Zurgen's staff appeared from the side, and Wuming held it directly in his hand, and the golden flash hit it directly. This is? The twisted golden staff attracted everyone's attention, and the 7 snake heads inlaid with different colored gems were full of noble and strange colors. Even Ishtar froze in midair with her hands in a shooting position. Ah! I know! Roman, who thought he had completely figured it out, was the first to speak and break the silence. As we all know, the fight for power is extremely common in myth. Even the virtuous Uruk Hyunryong also has a desire for power. According to the Gilgamesh epic records, the Uruk Hyunryong once seized Ishtar's position as the Uruk city god and drove Ishtar out of the Uruk. There are also many small stories that have been investigated by many scholars and experts. Although various experts and professors have different opinions, there are many parts that are worth referencing. For example, Uruk Hyunryong seized other things from Ishtar. When Roman said this, Wuming more or less understood what he was trying to say. The staff in Hyunryong's hand is obviously consistent with the 7-headed warhammer staff that belonged to Ishtar in the myth. So, it's probably because the Uruk Hyunryong seized a lot of things from Ishtar that caused Ishtar to hate the Uruk Hyunryong. Roman explained with confidence. Gudatsi and Matthew nodded as if they had suddenly seen the light. Only Merlin watched the scene unfold with a smile and did not say anything. If Wuming didn't know whether he had done it or not, he might have believed it too. When he thought about it carefully, Roman's analysis was indeed quite reasonable. In this way, it was understandable that Ishtar was full of resentment and anger towards Wuming. What the hell is this? Wuming sighed helplessly. Reasonable? 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 Facts were facts. This was something that couldn't be said carelessly. Wuming didn't steal anything from Ishtar at all. Well, the idea of stealing the Uruk's city guardian was also nonsense. However, Wuming could more or less understand why all of this turned out like this. Wuming, who didn't like Ishtar, did drive Ishtar away in the past, but that was only because Ishtar had done something that he couldn't do, so Wuming did that. And Ishtar would come back soon because she couldn't do without the tributes from the citizens, such as gems, 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 and so on. Perhaps it was because he had driven her away too many times, coupled with the fact that the records of later generations weren't perfect. The story was gradually changed into that Uruk Hyunryong stole the position of the Uruk's city guardian from Ishtar. Wuming also understood. After all, the various myths in modern times were the result of people's exaggerations in history. As for the so-called 7-headed warhammer staff, it was purely because it was similar. It wasn't Ishtar's staff at all. But did Ishtar really think so? Yes, that's right. I'm talking to you, Hyunryong. Give me back my seven-headed warhammer staff. At this moment, Ishtar didn't care whether what Roman said was true or not. She was going to make the best of it. She had her eyes on the gorgeous staff. Chapter 9-10. At that moment, Guidazzi and Matthew didn't know what to say. Roman and Leonardo da Vinci, who were in the Chaldea control room, naturally didn't speak again. It was obvious that the matter was both complicated and simple. But all in all, Wuming seemed to be in the right. Even Guidazzi and Matthew could see that Ishtar was obviously panicking. Ishtar was obviously the kind of person who couldn't refute after her lie was exposed in front of her elders. Only Merlin, who knew what was going on, half squatted on the ground with his back facing everyone. He seemed to be laughing so hard that he was twitching. "You stupid goddess, are you blinded by money? You don't even know how to lie." Ishtar was even more embarrassed by Wuming's words. After all, this was indeed the truth. Ishtar could speak casually in front of others, but in front of Wuming, it was a little difficult. Although I also know that you want to take advantage of Roman's words and take my Ains Uar Gong staff for yourself, I still have to say that your IQ matches the number of gems you have. Finally, Wuming shouted a sentence. "You shameless loser and stupid goddess! Reflect on yourself." The roar like a dragon resounded through the sky, and Guidazzi and Matthew couldn't help but cover their ears. The magic contained in Wuming's voice even interfered with the communication between Chaldea and Guidazzi. In short, although Wuming's voice couldn't spread to the Uruk, it was not a problem for it to spread to the entire Abif Mountain. However, no matter who was right or wrong in this matter, Wuming's voice was a disaster not much worse than social death for Ishtar. Damn Hyunryong! As if she had lost her mind, Ishtar hugged her head with both hands, and her eyes lost their focus. She sat on horse Anna and swayed as if she was about to fall off. Seeing this scene, the innocent little angel Mashu quickly reminded Ishtar. After all, Ishtar really looked like a daughter who couldn't do anything if no one took care of her. "Miss Ishtar, please be careful. It's dangerous." Matthew's words made Ishtar stunned, but then, she also recovered from the torture given by Wuming. "Don't worry, I won't fall off horse Anna." Ishtar flipped her hair as she spoke. Her whole person was full of charm, which was very much in line with her image as the mistress of the heavens, if the terrible scene from before was ignored. Speaking of which, where were we just now? With one hand on her chin, Ishtar was quite distressed as she recalled the conversation between her and Wuming. This made Wuming blush with shame. He always felt that this goddess who descended by relying on the body of a human girl had become quite unreliable. "Don't even think about my staff of Anzavulgan, loser goddess. Also, quickly go back to Uruk and be a city god. The demonic beasts have caused serious damage to this land, and the Uruk needs your strength." 3 times. Ishtar's face darkened. "You actually called me loser goddess 3 times. You're dead." Ishtar roared and aimed the simulated scope in Wuming's direction. Horse Anna began to gather magic. "Master, be careful." Matthew approached Guidazzi and raised his shield again. "Senior Villo, please be careful." However, Wuming did not pay attention to Matthew's words. His attention was on something else. Wuming had said, "loser goddess," more than 3 times, but Ishtar had only heard it 3 times. In other words, Ishtar had just arrived. So it was at that time. Wuming whispered to himself. "I heard it all before. You completely disliked my wanton behavior and wanted to detain me. I won't listen to you and sign a temporary contract with the human master over there." Wuming's heart sank. Sure enough, Ishtar had heard what he said at that time. "Can you be considered the mistress of the heavens like this? Ishtar, when your father and the others disappeared, you only know how to run away. I prefer the stubborn and mischievous goddess of the past who can be straightforward and stupid, and not the current loser goddess. You're a disgrace to the title of mistress of the heavens." I think you might as well stay in the border area of the Mesopotamia until we save this world. Loser goddess. Gudatsi and Matthew both looked at Wuming in shock. They were shocked that Wuming could say such harsh and mocking words. Even Merlin, who had been released from his stomach-ache from laughing state, became slightly more serious. At the same time, the atmosphere at the scene became very oppressive. It was like a precursor to a volcanic eruption. However, since it was called a precursor, it meant that there was no danger at the moment. Tianzhou horse Anna's magic cannon muzzle also stopped condensing magic. What did you say? Ishtar was provoked by Wuming's words. At this moment, her face was even gloomier than before. The magic emitted from her body made Gudatsi and Matthew tremble. Senior Villo. Why don't you stop talking for now? Matthew and Gudatsi tried to persuade Wuming. After all, it was not a wise thing to unilaterally anger the other party, was it not? However, this was the effect Wuming wanted. As the mistress of the heavens, Ishtar also had a very strong self-esteem, except when it came to gems. Through this aspect, he could well control the angry Ishtar. Of course, there was also a chance that it would make the other party even more furious. Next, it was time to see how Wuming would turn the situation around. I'm telling the truth. If you were Father God and the others, you would definitely take the initiative to clean up the magic beasts raging on the earth and protect the humans who believe in the god. And you, if I'm not wrong, in addition to driving Tianzhou horse Anna around, you would definitely only go to a sparsely populated place like the ranch to kill a few magic beasts and then sweep away the ranch owner's money, Ishtar. Wuming's words made Ishtar's face turn red instead of exploding. The magic stagnant at Ma Anna's muzzle also dissipated. What are you talking about? How could I do that? I'm just taking the offerings from the ranch owner? In other words, you did do that. This time, it was Wuming's turn to be gloomy. How thick-skinned must she be to do such a thing? Squeak. Seeing Wuming like this, Ishtar seemed to be frightened and let out a strange cry. Gudatsi, Matthew, and Roman and Leonardo da Vinci, who were in Chaldea's control room, looked like they had seen a ghost. At this moment, they felt like Wuming was the perfect counter to Ishtar. You just wait. I'm not done with you, Ishtar said fiercely as she rode Tianzhou horse Anna to the top of the mountain. However, not knowing if it was an illusion, Gudatsi and the others felt that Ishtar was crying when she said this. Was the mistress of the heavens being bullied by the Uruk Hyunryong and crying? That's impossible, probably. Chapter 9:11. While everyone else was entangled by these messy matters, only Merlin was paying attention to Wuming with a clear mind. He felt that Wuming's expression at the moment was a bit similar to how he felt when he faced Artoria. Although the target was different, Wuming did give Merlin such a feeling at the moment. A worried old father. That's right, Wuming at the moment seemed to be worried about his disobedient daughter. Wuming was indeed worried. Everyone in Mesopotamia knew that Ishtar was spoiled by the god. Although she was a good god, she always did evil things. Back then, the reason why Wuming came to the Uruk was mainly because Wuming was tricked by Morgan Le Fay. By chance, he forcibly unlocked the bloodline of the origin of dragon, allowing Wuming to use the body of the origin of dragon when he was still a minor. However, at that time, Wuming was too accustomed to the body of the origin of dragon, and the awakening of the bloodline was not perfect. He could not control the body almost perfectly like Wuming now. In any case, Wuming awakened the origin of dragon by accident. In addition, Wuming was indeed injured at that time. Otherwise, Wuming would not have hidden to recuperate and used the statue that people made for him as his eyes to observe the Uruk. After that, Wuming used this eye to observe Ishtar's series of evil deeds. Wuming did not hate Ishtar, or rather, Wuming did not hate anyone, provided that no one provoked him. As long as no one provoked him, everything was fine. Wuming's attitude towards Ishtar was the same. As long as Ishtar did not provoke him, he would not pay attention to Ishtar. However, things did not go as planned. Ishtar would do some troublesome things from time to time. Not only did she easily provoke Wuming, but the Uruk citizens also always prayed to Wuming. The content of the prayers was not excessive like getting rid of Ishtar, but they were basically complaints about Ishtar and begging Ishtar to stop her evil deeds. Wuming was respected and worshipped by the citizens of the Uruk, and even Mesopotamia. When Ishtar really crossed the line and provoked him, Wuming would teach her a lesson. For example, he would beat Ishtar up and chase her out of the Uruk. At that time, Wuming was completely unfamiliar with his dragon body. He did not have a certain degree of understanding and development. Naturally, he was not that strong, but he was not so weak that he could not even defeat Ishtar. Logically speaking, Wuming's dragon body would only be completely restored after reaching adulthood. By chance, Wuming's dragon body was unlocked in advance, and it could be regarded as a considerable increase in strength. However, even if Wuming defeated Ishtar, the Sumer gods were still around at that time. Even if it was a lesson, Wuming could not go too far. Even if the Sumer gods were afraid of Wuming's identity, if he did not give them face and taught Ishtar a lesson, who knew what the Sumer gods would do in the end? Even a cornered dog would jump over a wall, let alone a group of gods. Therefore, Wuming, who was not invincible, had to learn to be moderate. Besides, it did not mean that he had to use force to teach. Most of the time, wisdom was better than force. Especially when facing Ishtar, the spoiled mistress of the heavens, Wuming found that it was particularly easy for him to use his brain to deal with her. However, it was as if she had forgotten the pain after the scar healed. After a few days, she would naturally return as if nothing had happened. Gaden, who was also Ishtar's father, once came to look for Wuming, and the two had a short conversation about Ishtar. It was nothing more than taking care of Ishtar, saying that she was still young and immature, and so on. Gaden was like a parent meeting the class teacher. However, every time Wuming talked about Ishtar's mistakes, the other party would always smile and change the topic, constantly asking Wuming to help take care of Ishtar. This made Wuming very helpless. After all, even if you asked Wuming to take care of Ishtar, he could not do so. After all, Ishtar did not have the slightest respect for Wuming. To put it simply, Ishtar would not listen to Wuming at all. It was like a naughty student being reprimanded by the class teacher. On the surface, they would say that they would change, but afterward, they would forget everything they promised. Ishtar was obviously such a student, and whether it was in the open or in the dark, she did not show the slightest willingness to be obedient. She still did things her own way, and in the end, she became even worse. The Bull of Heaven incident was the embodiment of Ishtar's worsening behavior. However, it was not only bad. Ever since the Bull of Heaven incident, Ishtar had a trace of fear for Wuming. Although Ishtar herself was not aware of it, Wuming obviously noticed it. Wuming also had a big prejudice against Ishtar because she indirectly released the Bull of Heaven. Therefore, after that incident, Wuming became stricter with Ishtar. Ishtar, who had a trace of fear, was also frightened by Wuming's strictness. Gradually, she did not return to Uruk. This was probably the origin of the legend that Uruk Hyunryong was the Uruk city god who stole Ishtar. Not long after that, the gods gradually separated from humans and gradually left the human world. Wuming also left Uruk with Enkidu, who was opportunistically avoided death by himself. However, after the Bull of Heaven incident, the nature of the relationship between Wuming and Ishtar did indeed change. Especially now that Ishtar appeared as a pseudo-servant, the special relationship between the two became even more obvious. If one had to describe it, it was like the relationship between a melancholy homeroom teacher and a naughty student had changed to an old father and a spoiled daughter. Because there was still kindness in Ishtar's bones, and Wuming's previous actions were also good intentions. After the gods disappeared, Ishtar, who appeared as a pseudo-servant in this world, had a feeling of dependence on Hyunryong, who used to be very strict with her. It was like a naughty student whose father was in trouble would subconsciously ask for help from their neighbor, who used to take care of them and teach them a lesson. However, neither of them noticed this, otherwise, things wouldn't have turned out this way. Merlin, as a bystander, saw through everything. This was probably the so-called, the onlooker sees the game more clearly. Willow-senpai, what should we do next? Anyway, Matthew thought that her brain couldn't think anymore. This series of events made Matthew at a loss, and she didn't know what to do next. Continue to climb the mountain. Wu-ming pointed at the faintly visible palace on the mountain, and then immediately moved. Since we're already here, if we don't bring Ishtar back, I'll feel bad no matter how I think about it. However, as soon as Wu-ming finished his sentence, the entire Abif mountain shook violently. Chapter 9:12. What's going on? Gudatsi, who lost her balance and almost fell, could not help but look at Wu-ming. Oh, it seems to be an Abifu spirit. Merlin looked thoughtfully in a certain direction on the mountain, and said in surprise. Abifu spirit? Gudatsi and Matthew were full of doubts about the so-called Abifu spirit. What is that? A monster? A ghost? However, at the next moment, as if responding to Gudatsi and Matthew's doubts, a super-huge magical pig rushed down from the mountain. From the looks of it, it seemed like it wanted to destroy Gudatsi and the others in one blow. That's an Abifu spirit? Gudatsi was shocked. It was clearly a large magical beast. After Mount Abifu was killed by the former Ishtar, a magical beast was naturally formed in the mountain. The magical beast represents the anger of Mount Abifu, so it's called the Abifu spirit. However, everyone had no time to listen to Wu-ming's explanation. At this moment, whether it was the current speed of the magical pig or the position of everyone, it clearly pointed out the situation they were in at the moment. It's a big crisis. Although his words were full of panic, Matthew immediately put up his shield in front of everyone. Master! Matthew glanced at Gudatsi, and Gudatsi nodded knowingly. At this time, it was obviously unrealistic to escape, so Matthew was ready to activate his noble phantasm to resist the impact of the magical pig. Gudatsi was also ready to support him with her command spell just in case. At this time, Wu-ming suddenly walked to Matthew, who had already put up his shield, put his hand on Matthew's shoulder, and said, "Let me do it." Senior Willow? Matthew could not make up his mind for a while, and turned to look at his senior. Gudatsi nodded. Since Wu-ming said so, she believed in him. Senior Willow, please be careful. Matthew did not withdraw his shield. After talking to Wu-ming, he returned to Gudatsi's side. Even with the protection of Senior Willow, he can't relax. He still has to protect his senior. Assassin, how are you going to deal with it? Gudatsi looked at the magical pig that was getting closer and closer, and looked at Wu-ming with a little panic. Tachika, do you know that I'm partly responsible for the reason why Mount Abifu was killed by Ishtar? As if reflecting this sentence, when a bifling saw Wu-ming standing at the front, it became even angrier, and even sped up a little. You're also partly responsible? Gudatsi was stunned. You can say that I didn't save him. Without further explanation, Wu-ming looked at a bifling, who was getting angrier, and stretched out his hand. Wu-ming has long known that Mount Abifu will be killed by Ishtar through his understanding of the mysterious world. Therefore, Wu-ming did not intervene too much in this matter. When he came to the land of Mesopotamia, he had several conversations with the mountain spirit of Mount Abifu. When he brought Gil to Mount Abifu also gave Wu-ming a lot of convenience. It was precisely because of his good impression that Wu-ming helped Mount Abifu and sent Ishtar away to avoid Mount Abifu's death. However, when the Ishtar in the parallel world learned about Gilgamesh's gender, her anger affected Mount Abifu, and Wu-ming's inaction was also a factor. Although that happened in the parallel world, it will be similar in this world. What happened in the parallel world where Wu-Ming is in, other parallel worlds will definitely be affected to a certain extent. Wu-Ming knows in his heart that the suppression force of the M-shaped moon world will definitely do this. Therefore, when facing the angry Abifu in this parallel world, Wu-Ming had a strange feeling. He and the mountain spirit of Mount Abifu are not very close friends, but they are still friends. Wu-Ming still has a trace of regret for his inaction in the beginning. This is also one of the few regrets of Wu-Ming in the continuous travel that continues to this day. The appearance of the Abifu spirit is probably related to my voice just now. Since I'm the one who lured it out, then I'll clean it up. Wu-Ming doesn't know whether the killing of Ishtar in this parallel world by the Abifu mountain has direct or indirect relationship with him, but Wu-Ming can be sure of one thing. At this moment, the Abifu spirit in front of Wu-Ming has become an existence like a violent spirit, and the only thing Wu-Ming can do is to give it relief. Thinking of this, Wu-Ming condensed a large amount of magic power in his hand. The powerful magic power caused the air to flow rapidly, thus creating wind. Moreover, the extremely dense magic power source in Wu-Ming's hand also produced some gravitational force, slowly attracting the surrounding stones and soil. Seeing this, Merlin's expression changed. Merlin is not interested in anything else, but the move Wu-Ming is about to use. This magic power, Roman in Chaldea also saw the data results from the detection instrument and made a shocked sound. Could it be? Immediately afterward, the magic power source in Wu-Ming's hand that had reached the limit of density suddenly compressed. In an instant, a high-intensity hurricane spread from Wu-Ming's palm to the surroundings, blowing Merlin's clothes. Gudatsi and Matthew were also unable to open their eyes because of the strong wind pressure. In the next second, a beam of light full of magic power and the size of a huge wild boar that was the incarnation of the Abifu spirit instantly shot towards the Abifu spirit that rushed in front of Wu-Ming. The Abifu spirit was swallowed by the beam of light without any preparation and without any sound. Then, the beam of light burst into the sky with the movement of Wu-Ming's arm. The beam of light disappeared, the wind pressure disappeared, and Gudatsi and Matthew also opened their eyes. The Abifu spirit had already disappeared, leaving only a charred trace that rushed along the ground to the mountain. Walala! Extremely fine sand, stones, and soil fell from the sky, which was the debris attracted by the gravity generated by the magic power source. Wait a minute! Was that just a simple magic cannon? Roman's shocked voice came out from Gudatsi's wrist again. Magic cannon? Gudatsi asked in confusion. It's a magic trick where pure magic is processed, transformed, and strengthened to shoot at the enemy in the form of bullets or cannonballs. It's called magic bullet, and magic cannon can be understood as a luxurious upgraded version of magic bullet. Whether its strength or range, it's improved by more than a little. Merlin kindly explained. The upgraded version of magic bullets, assassin, is really powerful. I've only just learned how to release ordinary magic bullets after a long time of practice. Gudatsi scratched the back of her head embarrassedly. You can't compare with him. Magic cannon has high requirements in fine operation and magic power. The former is fine, but almost no human can meet the latter. Chapter 9:13. Magicians were magicians because they were a group of people who studied magic. It was naturally possible to achieve the former, but the latter was really difficult for magicians. For example, the magic power of the magic cannon that Wu-Ming had just released was almost comparable to the magic power of a large spiritual vein. If ordinary magicians wanted to release such a magic cannon, they would not be able to do it without using some extremely special method. Senior Villow's magic power is indeed quite sufficient. Matthew remembered that when they were at the American Singularity, Wu-Ming created a fake Holy Grail that simply provided magic power for Wu-Ming. Wu-Ming's magic power was not infinite, but he did not lack magic power. There was no other reason. His magic power capacity was really beyond imagination. If Wuming's body was used as the source of the world, Wuming, who had sufficient magic power, would not have the slightest pressure to support the magic operation of a world. Not only was the amount great, but Wuming's magic power recovery was also extraordinary. However, at this time, Roman shouted, "Wait a minute. You're focusing on the wrong thing." The shout was as if he had seen something incredible. My equipment here shows that Hyunryong did not use a magic cannon, but a pure magic blast that looks like a magic cannon. Roman's words focused everyone's attention on Gudatzi's communication bracelet. "Doctor, what do you mean? It did not go through the processing, deformation, and strengthening of the general magic bullet process. He directly compressed the magic power to the extreme and simply released it?" Gudatzi and Matthew looked at each other, and then at Wuming at the same time. The three of them looked at each other without saying a word, but Wuming could clearly see that Gudatzi and Matthew's mouths were slowly opening wide. "Hey, hey, hey!" Merlin, who had already expected this, covered his ears in advance to prevent his ears from suffering. "Ahaha, although I have never seen Villow's magic power before." Merlin smiled rather relaxedly. "But, to be able to burn the ground like this, how much magic power must be compressed and released?" Matthew had some experience in magic, unlike Gudatzi, who was a newcomer. Anyway, in Matthew's eyes, it was simply compressed magic power and released it. Without magic modification, it would not be able to create such a scene. Although many servants had the skill, mana release, they could not create such a scene that looked like it was bombarded by a supergiant electromagnetic cannon. Mana release was a skill that allowed the user to release the mana stored in their body for a split second. It was a good choice for both damage and movement speed. Moreover, some servants also had obvious magic attribute. In that case, mana release could achieve different effects. For example, take Karna as an example. As a servant, the attribute of his skill, mana release, was flame. By releasing a large amount of magic power from the soles of his feet in an instant, the flame produced by the magic power could promote Karna to rise, thus achieving the effect of flight. By controlling the magic power intermittently, it could achieve the effect of hovering in the air. That was the advantage of mana release with obvious attribute. Although the ordinary mana release could also achieve this point, the ordinary mana release was indeed not as good as the mana release with the flame attribute. And Wuming's magic power did not have any attributes, it was just pure magic power. However, whether it was magic power with or without attributes, it was extremely difficult to create such a scene in front of Gudatzi and others. Mana release with such a large range required magic power that not everyone could have. In short, ordinary people and even servants did not have enough magic power. Almost no servant had as much magic power as Wuming, and even the energy in the god's body could not catch up with Wuming. And what was the advantage of having more magic power? It was the unlimited use of magic power, from quantitative change to qualitative change. Only quantitative change can lead to qualitative change, which was understood by everyone, but not everyone could do it. After all, no one could squander their magic power like Wuming. The magic power compressed by Wuming even produced a trace of gravity, which was enough to imagine how huge the base of the magic power compressed by Wuming was. It can be said that if Villo didn't artificially raise the magic power after the compression, I'm afraid half of Ibif Mountain would have been impacted and exploded. Roman made the final statement. I'm going to drink some coffee to relieve my shocked heart. See you later. However, Wuming did not think that drinking coffee would have an effect on relieving heart fatigue. After that, Roman closed the communication channel. Matthew saw that Roman's voice no longer came out of the communication bracelet, so he raised his head and looked at Wuming. Matthew swallowed his saliva to show that he still hadn't recovered from the shock just now. Gudatzi was not affected much. By the way, assassin, what will happen if you blow yourself up? Gudatsi suddenly asked a question, which also attracted Matthew's attention. The explosion will probably affect the range between here and the Uruk. Ibif Mountain was still some distance away from the Uruk, which was indeed terrifying. At this moment, Wuming's bad taste broke out. Why, do you want me to try? Wuming looked at Gudatsi with a smile on his face. If it's your request, Tachika, it's not that I can't do it. I'll be happy to try it for you. Let's not. Let's go up the mountain. Goddess Ishtar is probably tired of waiting for us. Gudatsi immediately waved her hand, but the trace of sweat on her forehead still showed a trace of panic in the girl's heart. You're right. We pretended to think for a moment, then turned around and continued climbing the mountain. When we passed by the scorch marks on the mountain, Gudatsi and Matthew couldn't help but take a few more glances. If they were hit by this cannon, it would indeed be terrifying. The two thought of the angry Ibif spirit. It was really pitiful, and then the two rejoiced. Fortunately, when they fired the magic cannon just now, they didn't aim it at the mountain, otherwise. I'm sorry, Tachika, Matthew, the mountain path opposite us is broken in half, and we can't use it, Wuming, who was walking in front, suddenly said. Maybe it was affected by the magic cannon. Anyway, we can't use it for a while. Okay, let's pretend that they didn't say anything. Wuming looked at Gudatsi and Matthew, then looked at Merlin, and made a decision in his heart that made Merlin feel a little uneasy. A moment later, Wuming carried Gudatsi and Matthew to the top of the mountain. Is this Goddess Ishtar's palace? The first thing that came into Matthew's sight was a building that was different from the surrounding barren land, and it flashed with a hint of gold. But it's just a little. Gudatsi smiled awkwardly. What was Gudatsi laughing about? It was none other than Gudatsi laughing at the two large manekiniko in front of the entrance of Ishtar's palace. Chapter 9:14. Wuming naturally also noticed the large manekiniko in front of Ishtar's palace. Although it looked funny, it was not as simple as it looked. However, Wuming did not think that it was from Ishtar's memory. After all, there was no such thing as a manekiniko in Mesopotamia before BC. It was probably the knowledge brought by the girl that Ishtar relied on. After all, the girl lived in the 21st century. By the way, Merlin hasn't come up yet? Wuming did not see Merlin for a long time, and could not help but ask. This. Gudatsi and Matthew looked at each other. They did not know what to say. At this time, a weak voice came into Wuming's ears. Damn it, Vero, you bastard! How dare you make me climb up the cliff by myself? At a certain cliff, a hand so white that it didn't look like a human suddenly reached out and grabbed the ground. Then, a staff was stretched out by the person's other hand and pierced into the ground to complete the fixation. Finally, the white-haired Big Brother Dream Demon appeared in front of Wu Ming and the others, looking exhausted. I can't bring 3 people with me, so I have to trouble you. You are also a servant, Merlin. You can't let Tachika and the others climb up here. Wuming comforted Merlin with both reason and emotion. But Matthew is also a servant, however. As soon as Merlin finished this sentence, Wuming stared at him. It was as if he was saying, I'm a girl, are you? Let's go, maybe Ishtar will escape if we stay here for a long time. After Wuming finished, he did not care about Merlin. Gudatsi and Matthew, who wanted to say a few good words for Merlin, went straight to the gate of the temple. It's really unfair. Merlin shrugged his shoulders and complained. He immediately followed Wuming. In fact, Merlin was not as weak as he had imagined. Previously, Merlin had leaped and sprinted through the mountains to find Wuming. This was enough to show how good Merlin's stamina was. Moreover, part of Artoria's swordsmanship was taught by Merlin. Even if such a person claimed to be a magician, who would believe it? By the way, Wuming also learned swordsmanship from Merlin with Artoria, but because the effect was not obvious, it was better to use the spear skills taught by his master, Skahar, so he did not learn much. Walking past the Manekiniko, Wuming thought that the Manekiniko could move, but it kept its Manekiniko posture and did not move at all. This dispelled Wuming's idea that the two Manekiniko were gatekeepers. The four continued to go deeper. Because Ishtar's palace was built on the mountain, some parts of the interior were full of darkness. Not only that, the internal structure and the external appearance looked very different. There was no gorgeous look at all. Is this really the palace of the goddess Ishtar? Gudatsi could not help but ask. Obviously, the palace looked so gorgeous from the outside, but the inside was quite disappointing. Because Ishtar has no money. Wuming simply said the truth. This is simple and easy to understand, Tachika. You just need to remember that Ishtar is a loser goddess who loves money and gems, but has no fate with these things. Okay. Gudatsi nodded a little at a loss. After walking for a little while, Matthew saw flashing lights in front of them. Are those torches? It was the light of burning torches. The walls on both sides of the road were inlaid with burning torches, which made the passage look a little more majestic. However, it was only a sliver of, it's almost there. Although Wuming had not been here before, Wuming could feel the divinity of Ishtar. So, their destination was almost there, the main palace where Ishtar lived. Sure enough, after walking through the corridor inlaid with burning torches, the four of them entered a room that looked like a hall. In the middle of the hall, there was a stone pedestal that looked like a throne. Under the stone pedestal were stones that had been trimmed. The stones increased the height of the stone pedestal, which seemed to be deliberately designed. If one wanted to look at the person sitting on the stone pedestal, one had to look up and let the person on the stone pedestal look down on them. It had to be said that this was the work of the gods to make the visitors worship them. Directly above the stone pedestal, there was a big hole in the middle of the ceiling of the main hall. Although it was artificially repaired, it could still be seen that it was violently damaged. Sunlight shone through the big hole like a skylight into the palace, making the originally rather shabby palace look high-end and classy. And the stone pedestal happened to be completely illuminated by the sunlight. Whether it was morning or evening, as long as there was sunlight, the stone pedestal would be illuminated. This design was quite satisfactory. It seems that Ishtar's brain is not as bad as I thought. Wuming looked at the scene and nodded in praise. Of course, who do you think I am? A charming voice came from the shadow of the palace. Then, a beautiful goddess slowly walked out of the shadow and came into everyone's sight. This person was Ishtar, who ran away after being angered by Wuming. I am Ishtar, the mistress of the heavens. This is my palace, Ishtar, so of course I have to be more careful. As Ishtar said, she gently jumped directly onto the stone pedestal and crossed her legs, looking down at Wuming and others below. Goddess Ishtar, your posture is really good. The innocent Matthew couldn't help but complain. He had to admit that this posture was indeed very annoying. Ishtar adhered to her usual style. Even in the state of pseudo-servant, the material on her clothes was still very little. And Ishtar, who was sitting on the raised throne with her legs crossed, in front of Wuming and others, was already in a state of naked state in the future. However, among the four people present, Gudatsi was a woman, and Merlin was a nightmare who didn't understand human feelings. Neither of them would be moved by Ishtar. Only Matthew was too innocent to remind Ishtar. As for Wuming, he was completely used to it. Don't worry about this girl, she didn't care about her clothes at all since a long time ago. It was precisely because the previous Ishtar was extremely thin every day, coupled with Ishtar's bad character, that caused Wuming to have no interest in Ishtar at all. After all, he would get tired of seeing too much. The original Ishtar didn't have the slightest interest in Wuming, let alone the human girl Ishtar. The pseudo-servant state of Ishtar was really far from the original Ishtar in terms of beauty. More importantly, the human girl that Ishtar relied on was someone that Wuming knew. Chapter 9:15. The mentor, who once accidentally led Ilya onto the path of a magical girl, Rin Enosaka. Ishtar's face was exactly the same as Rin Enosaka's face, and similarly, Ishtar also retained Rin Enosaka's slightly regrettable breasts, just slightly. But to Wu Ming's surprise, after Mashu reminded him, Ishtar showed a hint of shyness and embarrassment. He didn't know if it was because of the existence in Ishtar's body, but after Mashu reminded him, Ishtar showed a shy and embarrassed look. Shocked. Ishtar actually blushed out of shyness? But seemingly noticing Wu Ming's surprise, Ishtar's face suddenly changed, and her slightly red cheeks instantly became normal. In the next second, Tianzhou's horse Anna flew in through the big hole in the ceiling. Ishtar jumped slightly and sat directly on horse Anna, and let horse Anna rise into the air and stay away from Wu Ming. It could be considered as indirectly preventing her from being exposed. However, Wu Ming didn't give Ishtar any face. When Ishtar sat on horse Anna and moved, Wu Ming directly said the truth of his guess. "By the way, were you hiding over there just now?" Sigh. "Wait, no, why would I hide over there?" Although Ishtar seemed a little flustered, she immediately pretended to be calm. "I thought you didn't dare to see me. In that case, let's get straight to the point." Wu Ming no longer held back with Ishtar. "Come back to Uruk with us, mistress of the heavens Ishtar. The Uruk needs the power of your goddess." Wu Ming stretched out his right hand to Ishtar, who was flying high in the sky and bathed in the sun, and very simply and violently pulled her to his side. This made Gadotsi, Matthew, and even Merlin dumbfounded. Even Roman and Leonardo da Vinci, who were monitoring in Chaldea, were taken aback by Wu Ming's sudden invitation. Vilo-senpai, goddess Ishtar wouldn't agree. In the end, Matthew raised a question. Both sides were clearly standing on opposite sides, so why did Wu Ming still ask such a question that would definitely be rejected? Not only Matthew, but Gadotsi also didn't understand. Why wouldn't she agree? Ishtar never said that she wouldn't return to Uruk with us. Everyone was stunned. Carefully recalling Ishtar's words, it seemed that it was indeed as Wu Ming said. Ishtar never said that she wouldn't return to Uruk. She only said that she wouldn't sign a temporary contract with Gadotsi. Ishtar, who was also stunned by Wu Ming's sudden invitation, also recovered at this moment. Ishtar was also surprised by Wu Ming's approach, but after carefully recalling, she really didn't say that she wouldn't return to Uruk. In other words, there was still a chance for things to turn around? Yes, Ishtar was a little happy, but she couldn't help it because Wu Ming was here. Ishtar was indeed hiding just now. She knew that if there were only a few people in Chaldea, Ishtar wouldn't have to care about their expressions at all and could do whatever she wanted. However, Wu Ming just had to come with her. When she returned to her palace, she heard a loud noise and felt a strong magic power. It was undoubtedly Wu Ming's magic power, and Ishtar always felt that Wu Ming was stronger than before. Ishtar knew that she couldn't beat Wu Ming. Without her father's protection, Ishtar would definitely be hung up and beaten by Wu Ming. In the end, she would be shipped back to Uruk and forced to sign a contract with that human girl. Even worse, Ishtar would be forced to become Gold Twinkle's subordinate and act according to his orders. This was something she didn't want to encounter in any case. However, she couldn't compromise just like that. Sign a contract with a human master and then go back to work for Gold Twinkle? What a joke. And for some reason, Ishtar felt like she couldn't raise her head in front of Wu Ming. Just like most human beings, like a child meeting their parents, or a student meeting their teacher, Ishtar realized that she had a natural fear of Wu Ming for some reason. That was why when she faced Wu Ming before, no matter how angry she was, Wu Ming lectured her, or when she saw Wu Ming get angry, she was like a deflated balloon. She could only blame it on the aftereffects of being bullied by Wu Ming in the past. That was why Ishtar was thinking when she hid. If she couldn't do it, she would just run away. It had to be said that Wu Ming guessed Ishtar's thoughts. It felt like, the person who knows you best is not your friend, but your enemy. Wuming was afraid that if they spent too much time on the road, Ishtar would run away after letting her imagination run wild, so Wuming directly flew up with Gudatsi and the others. Anyway, it wasn't like Ishtar hadn't done this kind of thing before, and for her, it wasn't something to be embarrassed about. From the looks of it, it was also because Wuming and the others came a little too quickly that Ishtar didn't have time to run away. She had no choice but to face them with force. Ishtar, I can take a step back. You don't have to sign a contract with our master, and you don't have to be Gil's servant. You only have to cooperate with us to deal with the monsters. This is already the greatest respect we can give to you as a goddess. Since Ishtar refused to sign a temporary contract, Wuming would just cancel this condition. As for the content of the second condition, it was even easier to understand. We have already made a big concession. I hope you can consider it. After Wuming finished speaking, he didn't say anything else. This made Ishtar a little surprised that Wuming would actually give in. According to Ishtar's understanding of Wuming, in this kind of situation where the gods disappeared and she did something slightly out of line, Wuming should directly attack her. She really couldn't beat Wuming, and there was no other way except to run away. However, according to Ishtar's understanding, before Wuming and the others came, she could still run away. But now, she probably couldn't run away. It was because she couldn't run away that Ishtar forced herself to meet Wuming and the others. However, Ishtar didn't expect that Wuming would actually choose to take a step back and discuss with her. This made Ishtar, who was originally a little nervous, feel a little proud. It was really just a little, and a little. I didn't expect that one day, Hyunryong, Sama would also bow to me very good, as Ishtar spoke, her face revealed a smile that she thought was perfect. However, this smile in front of Gudatsi and the others was like a blooming flower. Then what do you think? Wuming's entire face darkened, only his red eyes emitting a deeper red light. He had, indeed, taken a step back, but when he saw Ishtar's complacent look, he was still displeased. Ishtar was shocked by Wuming's expression, but at the same time, she understood one thing. Wuming's concession wasn't a compromise. It was just giving her face or giving her a choice. It wasn't giving her a chance to take a yard after taking an inch. Chapter 9:16. Well, since you are begging me, I can consider it. Although Ishtar's tone was quite weak when she said this. I originally wanted to use force against you, but for some reason, I gave up on this idea. Then, Wuming looked back at Merlin. That one is here. As soon as Wuming spoke, Merlin knew what Wuming was talking about. Indeed, they have arrived. Merlin nodded. Then, Merlin turned and walked toward the passage behind him. I will go and block them for a while, you guys discuss as soon as possible. As Merlin spoke, his figure disappeared. Assassin, where did Merlin go? After watching Merlin leave, Gudatsi immediately looked at Wuming. I will keep you in suspense. Wuming smiled at Gudatsi, then looked back at Ishtar flying in the sky. One last thing. I will fight for 1/10 of the treasures in Gil's treasure vault for you as a reward. 1/10. Ishtar was surprised, but the corners of her mouth subconsciously curled up. It was a surprise that came from the bottom of her heart. King Gilgamesh's treasure? Matthew couldn't help but repeat. Gilgamesh is the great king who collected all the treasures in the world. Even 1/10 of the treasures in the treasure vault is priceless. The goddess of beauty, harvest, and battle, mistress of the heavens Ishtar. You don't have to listen to the orders of Chaldea's master Tachika or the Uruk king Gilgamesh. You only need to listen to my instructions and fight the monsters with us. I will also fight for 1/10 of the treasures in King Gilgamesh's treasure vault for you as a reward. How about it, can you accept it? Wuming's voice was like magic as it entered Ishtar's ears like a bell. No problem. I accept. Ishtar looked proud as if she had earned a lot. In fact, when Wuming proposed to work together, Ishtar was hesitant to agree. Who would have thought that Wuming would ask for 1/10 of the treasures in Gilgamesh's treasure vault as a reward? This was something that Ishtar didn't expect. If she didn't agree now, what if Wuming went back on his word later? That was 1/10 of the treasures. It was more than enough to renovate this dilapidated temple. Ishtar, who was flying in the air, giggled as she fantasized about the treasures in her hands. She didn't notice the parchment in Wuming's hand, nor did she notice that there were 3 red marks on the back of Wuming's hand that looked like a bow and wings. 1 left wing, 1 right wing, and 1 arrow sandwiched between the left wing and the right wing. This was the pattern on the back of Wuming's hand. Then, the contract has been established. Looking at the contents of the parchment, Wuming showed a triumphant smile. Ishtar. Yes. However, Ishtar, who subconsciously answered Wuming, was stunned. What's going on? Ishtar found that she couldn't control herself and answered Wuming's words, and her body seemed to be affected as well. She couldn't move like a machine waiting for orders. No matter how stupid Ishtar was, she realized that something was wrong at this moment. Coincidentally, Ishtar saw the command seal, flashing with scarlet light on the back of Wuming's hand. That's command seal? How is that possible? Let's not talk about how she became his servant. She clearly had an A-level magic pair. Ishtar's mind was in a mess. Ishtar's A-level magic pair didn't have any effect on Ishtar's magic, and it didn't help her resist the command at all. Ishtar, help Merlin destroy the attacking demonic beasts. Remember, even if you let the demonic beasts escape, you can't let the demonic beast commander escape. You are allowed to use your noble phantoms, go. The left wing of the command seal on Wuming's hand glowed, and at the same time, Ishtar felt that there was an unimaginable amount of magic in her body. Yes. Ishtar was forced to answer, and she flew out of the big hole in the ceiling with Sky Boat Horse Anna. Damn Hyunryong. Just you wait. Ah. Ishtar was obviously crying in the end. In the end, Ishtar was bullied by Wuming and cried, "That stupid goddess is still so easy to deal with." Wuming looked at the command seal on the back of his hand, and he was in a good mood. That Villo Sr., Matthew was at a loss, and Gadotsi was even more serious. She was shocked. Assassin! What the hell is going on? This sentence contained a lot of questions. For example, why did Wuming have a command seal? Why did Ishtar suddenly sign a master-slave contract with Wuming? Why didn't Ishtar have the slightest ability to resist? One of my powers is to sign a contract with others. I used a word game to successfully make Ishtar sign a contract with me. Wuming's power was one of the 12 incarnations, the dependent incarnation, which had the ability to sign a contract with others and make them his dependent. Although the parchment was similar to the organizer's authority, it was only similar. It was not the organizer's authority, but the proof of Wuming's dependent contract. The organizer's authority could only be used in the world of the box court, and it would lose its effectiveness after leaving the box court. And if it could be used outside the box court, wouldn't it be invincible? As for this, Wuming raised his hand and showed the remaining 2 command seals to Gadotsi and Matthew. This is just a simple magic crystal, not a command seal. Wuming's command and restraint on Ishtar were the influence of the dependent incarnation, not the contract between the master and the servant. The dependent contract was deeply ingrained in one's bones, so Ishtar's magic power would not work at all, even if her magic power was X. The magic crystal was like the house's anti-theft system, and the command seal was like the thief's theft method. The anti-theft system could naturally play a certain role in the thief's theft method. However, the contract between Wuming and Ishtar was the product of Ishtar's consent. It was like Wuming got the key to the house from Ishtar. With the key, Wuming could naturally bypass the anti-theft system and enter Ishtar's house. Ishtar, who signed a word game contract with Wuming, would be directly under Wuming's control, and would not have any effect on magic at all. And these 3 command seal marks were just the magic crystals that Wuming used to support Ishtar. It could be said that they had nothing to do with the command seal. And Wuming used such a magic crystal only because Wuming wanted Ishtar to directly use the noble phantasm when her magic was saturated. Boom! Chapter 9:17. The violent explosion shook the entire Abif mountain. Bits of stone fell from Ishtar's palace onto Wuming, Gudatsi, and Matthew. What was that sound? Gudatsi and Matthew both looked in the direction of the explosion. It's probably Ishtar releasing her noble phantasm. Through the contract, Wuming could feel the rapid depletion of the mana in Ishtar's body. He guessed that Ishtar had most likely released her noble phantasm. By the way, Senior Villo, how did you know that the demonic beasts would appear here? Matthew was quite puzzled. This was an area with continuous mountains. The demonic beasts would not be able to advance from here. I captured one of the demonic beasts' commanders, Ulidim. Merlin used an illusion to obtain information from Ulidim's mind. We learned that the demonic beasts would advance from the mountainous areas in the southwest, near the Persian Gulf, and the mountainous areas in the northeast. Then, Wuming told the 2 of them his plan. The reason why Wuming brought Gudatsi and Matthew here to look for Ishtar was not only to recruit Ishtar, but also one of the reasons why Wuming came here. He had already killed the demonic beast's commander, Ulidim, who was preparing to attack from the mountainous areas in the southwest. In addition, there was the Quetzalcoatl in the south. As for the southwest, Wuming could relax, but there was no one in the mountainous areas in the northeast. So, Wuming thought of Ishtar, who was still a lone follower. Not only could he get Ishtar to join them, but he could also deal with the demonic beasts that were advancing from here. It was simply killing 2 birds with 1 stone. The reason why Wuming changed his mind about using force against Ishtar was entirely because Wuming's mental strength had detected a large number of demonic beasts approaching. The reason why Merlin gave Wuming the confirmation of the demonic beast's arrival was that Merlin had already set up a magic spell nearby to detect the demonic beast's attack. When did he set it up? Of course, it was when Wuming brought Gudatsi and Matthew straight to Ishtar's palace. The reason why he did not bring Merlin was partly because Wuming could not bring 3 people with him. Another reason was to let Merlin set up a detection spell. Although Merlin often complained that he would bite his tongue while chanting spells, he was still a magician after all. Naturally, he could do that. Due to the unexpected arrival of the magical beasts and the fact that Ishtar's matter had not been settled yet, Merlin decided to use his hallucinating spell to stop the magical beasts for now. Therefore, after Wuming tricked Ishtar into signing the contract, Wuming immediately sent Ishtar to support Merlin. The reason why he used a magical crystal on Ishtar was so that Ishtar could use her noble phantasm directly. Because Ishtar had killed Abif Mountain, there was no sign of life at all. There was no need to consider whether it would affect the innocent. Ishtar could use her noble phantasm without any worries. Moreover, even if she could not kill the demonic beast commander, the other mass-produced demonic beasts would definitely be killed. At this time, if they went to support the demonic beast commander, it would most likely be the death anniversary of the demonic beast commander next year. Let's go to Chica Matthew. It's time to deal with the demonic beast commander. Although the entire northeastern region of Mesopotamia was full of mountains, it was rare that there was a small barren plain between the mountains and the northern wall. There were no obstacles in the south of this small plain, and it could directly connect to the Uruk. However, because there were mountains in the east, north, and west of this plain, it was not included in the range of the northern wall. The northern wall was close to the mountains in the west of this plain. Logically speaking, there was no need to worry about the mountains. After all, demonic beasts could not cross the mountains. However, since the demonic beast commander's raid on the Uruk, Gilgamesh set up a defensive barrier nearby. After all, no one knew if the demonic beast commander had more methods that humans had not seen before. Although the strength of the temporarily designed barrier could not be compared to the northern wall, it was only used to delay time after all. This was a plain. If demonic beasts really crossed the mountains and came here, the soldiers on the defensive wall would be able to see it at a glance. Then, the barrier here would temporarily block the demonic beasts while the soldiers lined up to report to the Uruk. Because this place was not far from the Uruk, it was convenient for them to inform the soldiers or send more soldiers. However, there had never been any traces of demonic beasts here. Perhaps the demonic beasts were really blocked by the mountains. But even so, Gilgamesh would not be careless. It was because of his carelessness against the demonic beast commander that the Uruk was ambushed from the underground that night, and 1/3 of the population was killed or injured. Once a large number of demonic beasts appeared here, the situation would definitely be terrible. After all, this place was very close to the Uruk. If the demonic beasts broke through here, the entire Mesopotamia might be doomed. After all, the demonic beasts that gathered together were not terrible. The terrible thing was that the demonic beasts that broke in would spread out and slaughter the human beings on the land behind the northern wall. Therefore, to be on the safe side, Gilgamesh also sent 2 servants who survived the last beheading operation to this place. On the temporary wall of the defensive wall, a girl wearing a rather revealing ancient Japanese-style armor walked up. A katana was hanging horizontally on her waist, and her long hair was tied into a knot on the left side to form a bun hairstyle. After that, her left ponytail fell to her waist. She looked quite handsome. This person was one of the 2 surviving servants, Ryder. Her real name was Nuwakamaru. As usual, she needed to check the situation of the soldiers and see if there were any demonic beasts attacking. Nuwakamaru-sama, you came to inspect again. The soldiers were accustomed to it. They were quite respectful to the strong person who was summoned by King Gilgamesh. The young girl was agile and strong in martial arts. She was also kind and treated the soldiers equally. Thus, she was deeply respected by the soldiers. Demonic beasts won't come to the mountains, and we are here. You can rest assured. A soldier patted his chest and vowed. Several soldiers next to him also nodded in agreement. In this regard, Nuwakamaru smiled and shook her head. The defeated general only wants to complete the king's order to make up for his mistakes. Naturally, he should take it seriously. Nuwakamaru-sama's words are very true. However, everything is this poor monk's fault. Everything is this poor monk's fault. This poor monk should be punished twice. A monk with a large number of weapons on his back and a katana in his hand followed behind Nuwakamaru. This person was one of the 2 surviving servants, Lancer. His real name was Musasobo Benkei. Chapter 9:18. Don't say that, Bianqing. No matter what, you saved my life. Nyoruwan closed his eyes. It was as if he was recalling the last moment of the operation to decapitate the commander-in-chief. At that time, 10 servants carried out the beheading operation. The reason why Nuwakamaru and Musasobo Benkei survived was entirely because Musasobo Benkei, who was Nuwakamaru's minister, saved Nuwakamaru from being killed by the beasts. Musasobo Benkei pulled Nuwakamaru into the Euphrates River. However, there were also mass-produced beasts in the river, the winged mermaid Kururu. Musasobo Benkei and Nuwakamaru were almost killed by the winged mermaids. Fortunately, Musasobo Benkei activated his noble phantasm in time and temporarily affected the spirit of the winged mermaid. Musasobo Benkei and Nuwakamaru were able to escape, but both of them were seriously injured. It could only be said that it was fate. Although both of them were seriously injured, they were lucky not to die. By coincidence, both of them drifted to the north wall. Both the Euphrates River and the Tigris River flowed through the north wall. In the past, the Uruk did not defend these two rivers, causing a large number of winged mermaids to appear from the river and cause damage to the surrounding area. After that, according to Gilgamesh's plan, people set up a similar gate at the position of the two rivers passing through the north wall. The effect of the gate was simple. Beasts couldn't swim through, and the river flowed normally. Since demonic beasts couldn't swim past the barrier, the servants naturally couldn't swim past it. Nyo Rowaru and Musashi Ben-Kei were blocked outside the barrier. They happened to be discovered by the daily maintenance inspection personnel and were rescued. They were the only two servants who returned to Uruk alive. If Musasobo Benkei didn't pull Nawakamaru into the river at that time, perhaps both of them would be buried in different groups of beasts like the other 8 servants who participated in the beheading operation. No, Lord Nyo Rowaru. Chie-Ching of Musashigeru seemed to have something else he wanted to hide as he stammered. However, before Musasobo Benkei finished hesitating, on the wall of the stronghold, a soldier with sharp eyes suddenly saw a large cloud of dust on the plain in front of them. "What's that?" Many of the soldiers climbed to the top of the stronghold's walls to take a look. Even Nyo Rowaru did not listen to the hesitant words of Takashige. Instead, he jumped onto the battlements of the tower and squatted down. Because of his clothes, Nyo Rowaru's seductive figure looked in the direction where the soldiers were looking. Nawakamaru, whose eyesight was much better than many soldiers, instantly saw what was coming toward them along with the dust. That's beasts? Thousands or even more red-furred lion-like magical beasts were mixed in the smoke and dust, charging towards them like a flash flood. It was a rather impactful sight. "It's the mass-produced Yugur." Nawakamaru's eyes sharpened, and he instantly felt that something was wrong. He could only say that it was all thanks to King Gilgamesh and military advisor Zhuge's foresight. They had predicted that there would be beasts coming from here and set up the stronghold in advance. Otherwise, with so many beasts rushing over, without any defensive facilities, this place would definitely become the beasts' attack point, and they would destroy the entire Mesopotamia. Di Qing immediately returned to the Uruk and report the situation here to King Gilgamesh and ask for backup. Nawakamaru immediately jumped down from the high platform and went to Musasobo Benkei. "This?" "Yes, Sir Nawakamaru." Although Musasobo Benkei was a little hesitant, he immediately agreed. As for the reason why Nawakamaru did not let the soldiers report to the Uruk but let Musasobo Benkei do it, it was entirely because the strength of the servants was much stronger than the human soldiers. This was indeed the gods' era, and the humans here were indeed much stronger than the modern humans. Their physical fitness was obviously different, but the servants were still stronger than the humans here. Therefore, it was the best choice to let one servant go to the Uruk to report, and the other servant to command the soldiers to resist the beasts. Gilgamesh let Nawakamaru and Musasobo Benkei come together to guard this place. Although one less servant may lead to a decrease in combat power, it was better to be able to bring reinforcements faster than anything else. This was a war between humans and beasts, and the overall situation must be taken into account. Musasobo Benkei immediately set off. He did not need anything like a mount. The legs of a servant were the best means of transportation. Although Musasobo Benkei's dexterity was only C rank, but even a C rank's dexterity was much better than a human's. In addition, his durability had reached B+ rank. Musasobo Benkei could run all the way to the Uruk at high speed. Watching Musasobo Benkei leave, Nawakamaru also pulled out the famed sword on his waist. "Everyone, prepare to defend. Let these beasts see how powerful we are." Nawakamaru was her nickname. Her real name was Minamoto Yashitsugu. She was a general of the Minamoto family. Since she was a general, it was easy for her to command the soldiers. Oh. Although there were only a few of them, the soldiers still made a deafening sound. The soldiers began to defend themselves. Some soldiers set up spears in the gaps of the walls, while others set up bows and arrows in the concave battlements on the walls. Everyone was waiting for the magic beasts to approach, ready to attack at any time. Nuwakamaru held the famed sword bow LV and was ready to attack. She was ready to jump down when the beasts approached and use the Uruk as a springboard to cast her noble phantasm. Since the beasts can cross the mountain, there must be a commander commanding them from the back. Nuwakamaru gathered magic in her eyes and tried to look at the back of the army of beasts that was covered by the smoke. A lion-headed man was walking upright on the plain under the cover of the smoke. Just one. Nuwakamaru's mouth curved, and her face was a little twisted. Since she had found the commander of the beasts, what Nuwakamaru needed to do was to take the head of the commander. Moreover, she was not afraid of just one commander. With so many beasts around her as a springboard, even if she could not kill the commander of the beasts, the original Uruk, she was confident that she would not be forced to retreat here. However, things were not as simple as Nuwakamaru thought. Amidst this horde of magical beasts, red three-headed snakes that were as thick as small pythons appeared one after another on Wudgel's body. They were brought along by Wudgel as he charged towards the stronghold. Gradually, the entire horde of magical beasts became a horde of magical beasts mixed with lions and snakes. Chapter 9:19. Is that a Musumafu? There are so many of them? Damn it! Because the group of demonic beasts was approaching, many soldiers saw the red three-headed snake wrapped around each Yugur. As early as 3 months ago, Gilgamesh released a notice about the types of demonic beasts, including the name, physical characteristics, degree of difficulty, number of appearance, and other information, so everyone knew the names of these demonic beasts. In an instant, it could be said that it caused a commotion. This kind of mass-produced Musumafu was extremely difficult to deal with, especially in this kind of offensive and defensive battle. These three-headed snakes could easily break through the human defense, through the gaps of the guns, and cause damage to the human, and disrupt the human formation. Because the number of Musumafu was very small before, its impact was not as big as other demonic beasts. Therefore, so far, the Uruk side had not made effective defensive measures against it. They could only shrink the gap of the guns to the extent that it would not affect the guns. However, these mass-produced Musumafu could still get through, as if they were constantly evolving. Their size was also shrinking. The gap of the guns could not be too small, or it would affect the performance of the guns, and these Musumafu's size at the moment just happened to be able to get through such a gap, and there were so many of them. More than one demonic beast commander. Nuwakamaru could not help but sigh. Because every demonic beast had a prototype, every mass-produced demonic beast would only listen to the orders of the prototype demonic beast commander, unless the prototype demonic beast, that is, the demonic beast commander, died. Since so many mass-produced Musumafu appeared here, that is to say, the prototype Musumafu, one of the demonic beast commanders, also came here. If it was only Yugur, Nuwakamaru could deal with it, and even have the opportunity to kill it. During the beheading operation, she, Musasobo Benkei, and another servant were responsible for the demonic beast commander was the prototype Yugur. Unfortunately, the strength of the prototype Yugur was beyond their expectations, and the other servant died directly. If it were not for Musasobo Benkei risking his life to save her, Nuwakamaru would definitely die under the claws and fangs of the Yugur. Nuwakamaru's mission failed. Before Nuwakamaru said in front of the soldiers to make up for the mistakes, referring to the mistakes of the mission failure. Moreover, escaping death was not without any benefit. At least, after the last test, Nuwakamaru had figured out the strength of the demonic beast commander, a prototype Yugur. Even if Yugur was a mythical beast, it was not out of the category of living creatures. So, as long as the head of the prototype Yuger was cut off, the prototype Yuger would definitely die. Nawakamaru, who was holding Bo-Lu, was sure that the mass-produced Yuger demonic beasts were used as a springboard to cast his noble phantasm. After being strengthened by the noble phantasm, if Bo-Lu's attack hit the neck of the prototype Yuger, it would definitely be cut off. Therefore, when Nawakamaru saw that the opponent's demonic beast commander was only Yuger, he was so happy that he almost became evil. However, this time, the opponent did not have one demonic beast commander, but two. Although the prototype Musumafu was nowhere to be seen, the other party must be lying in ambush somewhere. Sure enough, the beheading operation made the demonic beast commanders have a sense of crisis. As a result, two demonic beast commanders are now acting together. Nawakamaru was rather melancholy as he pondered. At present, they could not retreat and they could not block the attack. Looking at the soldiers around him who had lost their morale, Nawakamaru made a decision. Since they could not advance or retreat, they might as well cut off all means of retreat. Even if there's another demonic beast commander hiding in the dark, I'll still chop off Yuger's lion head. Nawakamaru shouted angrily and jumped down from the stronghold. She had decided to take the initiative. Master Nawakamaru? The soldiers looked at Nawakamaru's figure and could not help but worry. Retreat immediately. It's useless to stay here. Return to Uruk as soon as possible to get reinforcement. I'll hold the opponent back. Nawakamaru did not even turn his head as he finished speaking and directly rushed towards the demonic beast. The soldiers on the stronghold looked at each other. Although Nawakamaru said so, they still could not make up their mind. If it was only Yuger, they could still hold on for a while. However, Yuger was entangled with Musumafu. Once Yuger brought Musumafu close to the stronghold, those Musumafu would definitely squeeze through the gaps between the weapons. There was no need to think about it. They definitely could not stop them. However, he couldn't just become a deserter and abandon Nyo-Run. For a moment, the soldiers did not know what to do. However, the attentive soldiers discovered a problem. Something's not right. Based on the time it took for us to see the demonic beasts should have already rushed over at this distance. The attentive soldiers raised their doubts. The soldiers began to look around and discovered that the demonic beasts had not rushed over even after a long time. There was no change in the distance at all. Ever since they discovered Musumafu, the soldiers lost their morale and did not observe the enemy's situation. That was why they did not discover anything. Now that they observed again, the soldiers really did discover something different. In the middle of the plains, a white-haired man holding a magic staff appeared out of nowhere and stood there. Is that the court magician, Lord Merlin? Some of the soldiers had seen Merlin before and immediately recognized the strange-looking Merlin. Could it be that Lord Merlin is helping us? That must be it. Otherwise, why would the demonic beasts seem to be walking on the spot? It had to be said that when humans faced a crisis, there would be a moment when their minds would become emotional. However, when humans escaped from a crisis and calmed down, their minds would also become clear in an instant. Indeed, Merlin had cast an illusion spell and successfully stopped the demonic beast. However, it could only last for a while. Nawakamaru, who had rushed out, also saw Merlin's figure. However, since she had already rushed out, there was no reason for her to return. Therefore, Nawakamaru rushed to Merlin's side in one breath. Lord Merlin? Why are you here? Nawakamaru was a little excited. It seemed that the Uruk's reinforcements had arrived. I just happened to pass by. The Uruk side still doesn't know the situation here. Merlin, who saw Nawakamaru's expectation, gave her a merciless blow. Are you the only one who came here? Is this too dangerous? Nawakamaru was startled. If Merlin's illusion spell was broken, then including Merlin, Nawakamaru, and many soldiers would become food for the demonic beast. For example, now. Bang! The sound of glass breaking was heard. The demonic beasts began their official charge as the light purple fog dispersed. I took the initiative to break the illusion spell. Merlin explained the situation without waiting for Nowakamaru to ask. Lord Merlin? However, while Nowakamaru was surprised, Merlin immediately spoke again. Don't worry, I didn't say that I came alone. Merlin smiled and then pointed to the sky. Nowakamaru looked up subconsciously and found that a star was rising. Ungal ta kaigal he, mountain shakes the star's salary. Chapter 920. The rising golden star was like a falling meteor, crashing straight into the center of the horde of monsters. Boom! The impact of the golden star directly penetrated the ground, as if it had been blasted by countless TNT. The rocks and soil were instantly burned into black powder by the flames, and then evaporated by the high temperature of the explosion. At the same time, countless monsters were also affected. If someone could see from the center of the explosion, they would see that the monsters were instantly vaporized by the flames and high temperature. The mass-produced Yujul was still fine. At least some of its limbs were left, such as its teeth and skull with a trace of magic power. The mass-produced Musumafu, which was much smaller than Yujul, suffered. Its entire body was engulfed by the high temperature of the explosion, and the flames had completely melted the slender bones of the mass-produced Musumafu. The huge explosion caused the ground to collapse. Although it was not as strong as Wuming's beam of light that affected the entire Mesopotamia, the entire northeastern region was still affected. The defensive barrier that was set up here shook because of the huge explosion. As it was only temporary, its quality was not very good. At this moment, it was in a state of near collapse. The soldiers had all evacuated from the barrier. If he didn't die in the process of fighting with the magical beasts but was crushed to death by the building, it would be really embarrassing. But even if they were far away from the barrier, the soldiers still found out who had released such a terrifying golden star. In Mesopotamia, when the golden star was mentioned, Ishtar would definitely be thought of. As expected, it's Lady Ishtar. Lady Ishtar, the mistress of the heavens? As expected of the goddess. She's still on our side. Long live Lady Ishtar. Oh! Ishtar, who was flying in the sky beside Ma Anna, heard the soldiers' cheers and praises for her. Her originally rather angry mood was now relieved. Ishtar was dissatisfied and even angry that Wuming had used his authority and word games to force a contract with her. After following Wuming's orders to come here, Ishtar's anger, along with the huge amount of magic power that Wuming had transferred to her, and most of the magic power in her body, were channeled into her noble artifact. She released it with resentment towards the monsters. This made Ishtar's noble artifact even more terrifying. At the same time, Ishtar was relieving her anger from falling into Wuming's trap. However, the soldiers thought that Ishtar came to help them because she saw the monsters attacking, and they all praised Ishtar. After hearing these praises, Ishtar felt a little ashamed, but her mood completely changed into pride and joy. Although it was not his intention, Ishtar had indeed helped the humans to eliminate the demon beasts. The humans praised and cheered for Ishtar from the bottom of their hearts, which made Ishtar feel happy, which was rare for Ishtar. Even if she had been spoiled since she was young, Ishtar's nature was still good. Helping the humans, being praised, thanked, and cheered by them, naturally made Ishtar's mood very comfortable. Seems like the situation after the contract is not as bad as I thought. Ishtar was obviously referring to the contract that Wuming had tricked her with his word games. Ishtar lifted the ponytail that was fluttering in front of her chest, and then crossed her arms in front of her chest. Her face showed a hint of sadness. It's just that the magic consumption is a little high, because she was too upset. In a fit of rage, Ishtar used up almost all the magic in her body. It could be said that the current Ishtar was an empty shell. She really did not have a single bit of magic left. If there were enemies now, other than her advantage of being able to fly, she was completely a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. Looking at the end of the explosion, the ground was completely under the tower, and the ground was filled with smoke and dust. Ishtar nodded. Anyway, there's basically no such possibility. What's wrong? Are you lacking magic? Wu-Ming, who had suddenly appeared beside Ishtar, suddenly spoke. Frightened, Ishtar hurriedly controlled the heavenly ship's horse, Anna, to retreat a distance away. You? When did you come over? Just now. Wu-Ming replied very calmly, and then raised his hand again. The magic crystal on the right wing suddenly disappeared, and a large amount of magic was instantly replenished in Ishtar's body. Looking at Ishtar's dazed face, Wu-Ming smiled. By the way, how does it feel to help a human? It feels pretty good. Although Ishtar still had a lot of resentment towards Wu-Ming, she was already unable to be unyielding towards him. Because of Wu-Ming, she was praised by the soldiers and received Wu-Ming's magic. At this moment, Ishtar was even weaker than before. You can easily receive the praise of a human, and most importantly, you're very happy yourself. Why do you have to be a high and mighty and lawless goddess? Probably because of the fusion with Rin and Osaka. Compared to the original Ishtar, the current Ishtar was more reasonable, so Wu-Ming began to reason with Ishtar. I don't want that. What I need is to be high and mighty. Humans only need to give me gems, I don't need their praise. However, these words were full of arrogance. Not only that, but Ishtar's actions were also full of arrogance. Ishtar once again crossed her arms and turned her head to the side to hide her blushing cheeks. Although the previous Ishtar was a little arrogant, now, she was more influenced by Rin and Osaka's arrogance. In this regard, Wu-Ming did not say anything more. Instead, he looked at her quietly. Ishtar was indeed used to being arrogant, but even the most mischievous child would want to be a good child one day. However, after being labeled as a mischievous child in the eyes of others, Ishtar couldn't be more obedient even if she wanted to. Since that was the case, she might as well continue to be a mischievous child. This was why Ishtar became more and more unruly. And today, Wu-Ming forced Ishtar to be a good child, for once, and he even let Ishtar taste the sweetness of it. This, to Ishtar, indeed, was not a bad feeling. Looking at the human soldiers who were cheering for Ishtar in the distance, Ishtar extended her hand to Wu-Ming. Okay, today, I, Ishtar, will temporarily recognize you, Hyunryong. You will serve me as my temporary master. Chapter 9:21. I'm glad that you're willing to turn over a new leaf, Ishtar. Your father will be happy if he knows about this. Wu-Ming reached out his hand to grab Ishtar's soft hand, but Ishtar immediately broke free and slapped Wu-Ming's hand in the face. I regret it. Can I cancel the contract? Ishtar was dissatisfied with Wu-Ming's tone, as if he was talking to a child. Wu-Ming just smiled. It was obvious that Ishtar was being arrogant again. Come to think of it, Ishtar, your noble phantasm is really terrifying. Wu-Ming said as he looked at the ground that was still collapsing. Smoke and dust rose from the ground that was penetrated. However, the food in the pot was from demonic beasts. After all, I used almost all of my mana except for the mana to maintain the current realm. It's natural for me to be able to create such an effect. Ishtar flipped her hair and looked quite proud. After Ishtar used the mana that Wu-Ming gave her and almost all of the mana in her body, as well as the resentment in her heart, Ishtar's mood became extraordinarily good. In addition to the cheers of the soldiers and Wu-Ming's kind words, Ishtar became even more arrogant. Of course, it didn't mean that Ishtar couldn't do it without Wu-Ming's mana. Ishtar's noble phantasm Mountain Shocking Star's salary, Angalta Kaigelshi, was classified as a mountain noble phantasm. It was sublimated from the deed of killing a Bifshan. Although this was a plain, it was still a part of the mountain range. Therefore, the effect of the mountain noble artifact could still be used. Therefore, even without Wuming's mana, Ishtar only needed to supply all of her mana to the noble artifact to easily blow up half of the plane. However, with such a large amount of mana provided by Silent Cry, Ishtar's noble phantasm was able to display an extraordinary effect. Half of the plain between the mountains was directly blown up by Ishtar's noble artifact. Countless demonic beasts were either burned to death by the flames or evaporated by the high temperature. Even if there were a few demonic beasts that were lucky enough to survive, they directly fell into the hole in the ground that was blown up by the explosion. Such a large number of demonic beasts were gone just like that. This could be considered a great victory for the humans. However, the demonic beast commanders definitely wouldn't die. Previously, even Ulidim didn't die under Wuming's multiple spells. Therefore, the two demonic beast commanders who were lucky to survive and fall into the collapsed plane definitely included the two demonic beast commanders who were still alive. After looking at Gadotsi and Matthew, who had already met up with Merlin, Wuming then looked at Ishtar. "Ishtar, do you dare to gamble with me?" Wuming's words piqued Ishtar's interest. "Whoa, what is there that this goddess doesn't dare to do?" Ishtar proudly puffed out her rather embarrassing chest, looking as if she wasn't afraid of anything. "If that's the case, let's go to the underworld." "No problem." However, after Ishtar agreed without hesitation, she was immediately dumbfounded. Wait, what did you say?" On the ground, Gadotsi and Matthew, who were brought here by Wuming, stood together with Merlin and Nawakamaru as they looked at the severely collapsed ground in front of them. They were both shocked by Ishtar and the large number of demonic beasts that died. Sure enough, Miss Ishtar is a true goddess. Matthew couldn't recover from the shock for a long time. Right. Merlin, is the demonic beast commander destroyed? Gadotsi, who recovered first, started to talk to Merlin. If it was just an attack like this, the demonic beast commander must still be alive. Probably fell into the underworld below. Walking to the edge of the collapsed ground, Merlin playfully put his head on his forehead and pretended to look down. What entered his eyes was a bottomless darkness. As far as Merlin was concerned, he couldn't see what was at the bottom of the darkness at all. Underworld? Gadotsi and Matthew were shocked when they heard this. An existence related to death was indeed a little uncomfortable for humans. The underworld of Kanzai is connected to the earth. Blowing up a big hole in the ground is the simplest and most violent way to enter the underworld. Gadotsi was shocked by Merlin's words about the underworld of Kanzai is connected to the earth. However, Matthew was quite concerned about another matter. "Mr. Merlin, this should be the end of the Kanzai when the gods disappeared. Does the underworld still exist?" Logically speaking, as the Kanzai faded away and the gods gradually disappeared, the underworld should have also dissipated and become non-existent. Therefore, Matthew was puzzled by Merlin's words about the demonic beast commander falling into the underworld. "Ha ha ha, Matthew, don't forget about the three goddesses' alliance." Merlin's tone was flirtatious as he smiled at Matthew. This made Matthew's cheeks turn red with shame. Then Gadotsi stood in front of Matthew and glared at Merlin. "So that's how it is. Because the goddess of the underworld of Mesopotamia has returned to this era, the underworld was also brought over." Gadotsi's bracelet emitted Roman's voice. Roman, who was in Chaldea, spoke again while recording the information. "But is it really so easy to enter the underworld? And the entire underground of Mesopotamia is the underworld?" In the face of Roman's question, Merlin chuckled and laughed. "Well, actually, I don't know much about it." Merlin smiled and scratched his head. "However, whether it is the underworld or not, Hyunryong will definitely go down. Speak of the devil." As soon as Merlin finished speaking, Gadotsi and Matthew saw Wuming and Ishtar rushing down from the sky. If only they could ignore the strange posture of Wuming and Ishtar. they saw Wuming pulling one of Ishtar's feet and flying down. Ishtar's face was dull, and it was obvious that she didn't understand what was going on. Is that His Excellency Hyunryong? I heard that His Excellency Hyunryong has returned. It's been a long time since we last met. Nawakamaru was deeply touched by the meeting between his peers and followers after half a year. Half a year ago, Wuming appeared in Uruk one step ahead of them. However, before they could get along and communicate, Wuming left. But in the past 6 months, only Musasobo Benkei, Leonidas I, and himself were left. However, Nawakamaru's question was not answered by Wuming, because Wuming pulled Ishtar and flew straight into the bottomless plain in front of everyone. Chapter 922. That. Is it really okay for Ms. Ishtar to go to the underworld? Matthew, who had read Mesopotamia's mythology, knew very well that Ishtar arrogantly entered the underworld and was killed by the goddess of the underworld. As a servant, the inheritance of being killed by the goddess of the underworld may cause the underworld to impose some restrictions on Ishtar. However, before anyone could answer Matthew's question, Ishtar's miserable scream came from the collapsed crater. Ah! No! Everyone looked at each other and smiled awkwardly. It turned out that Ishtar was forced by Wuming. At this moment, Gudatsi suddenly realized a problem. By the way, how do we go down? The way to go down? Well, whether it's me or Nawakamaru, we don't have the means to safely enter the underworld. If you want to enter the underworld, you have to jump down. Merlin nodded proudly. Jump down? Roman, who was in Chaldea, couldn't help but exclaim. The instruments in Chaldea were interfered with, and they couldn't detect how deep the crater was. How could they jump down directly in this situation? Ms. Nawakamaru, let's not talk about this for now. Matthew sighed helplessly. Merlin, what are you so proud of? Gudatsi looked at Merlin with contempt. Nawakamaru put her thin green into the scabbard and also sighed. Right now, we can only wait for the Uruk's reinforcements to arrive before making a decision. There are only a few of us, and we can't enter the underworld. Nyorowan was, after all, a former general. Before he could determine whether Wuming, Ishtar, and the others needed reinforcements, he could not act on impulse. But, Mr. Merlin, if we take this opportunity to support the senior Villo, can we take down the goddess of the underworld in one fell swoop? Matthew had a bold idea. Yes, if we support Assassin, maybe we can take down the goddess of the underworld in one fell swoop, and then we can focus on the goddess of Warcraft. Thinking of this, Gudatsi excitedly pulled Matthew's hand and prepared to go to the underworld with Matthew. Wasn't it just jumping down? Previously, when they came to this singularity, they had also experienced the experience of falling from a high altitude. It was a new experience after all. However, Merlin blocked their way with his staff. It's not that easy. You two, listen to me first. Merlin denied Gudatsi's suggestion. The underworld is full of death energy, and ordinary people can't stay there for a long time. Even if you wear a special magic dress, you can only stay there for a short period of time. Besides, Nawakamaru and I can't help. At most, we'll be a burden to the Villo. He already has Ishtar, and we don't need to send a few more burdens to burden him. Merlin became serious. Legend has it that in the underworld of the Mesopotamia, the goddess of the underworld, Ereshkigal, is the ruler of everything in the underworld. Any god in the underworld will be restricted by the underworld, and their divinity will be suppressed, making them powerless. Without divinity, they probably won't be weakened or suppressed, but if they aren't alive, I'm afraid they won't be able to exert their power. This was the opinion of Roman, who had urgently obtained information about the goddess of the underworld, Ereshkigal. That was why Merlin said that he couldn't help. Wait a minute? Won't Ishtar and assassin be in danger? Gudatsi was a little panicked. Ishtar was killed by the goddess of the underworld, and Wuming was a god in the Mesopotamia, Uruk Hyunryong. His divinity must be high, and Wuming's current identity was a servant, not a living being. In that case, after entering the underworld, wouldn't they become the lambs to be slaughtered by Ereshkigal? But even if they are alive, there are still risks. Although the goddess of the underworld, Ereshkigal, can't leave the underworld, as long as she is in the underworld, she can enjoy the authority of the underworld. This is the most powerful ability of the goddess of the underworld. Even if she faces a living being who can ignore the restrictions of the underworld, Ereshkigal won't be at a disadvantage. In short, if it's as recorded in the myths, the goddess of the underworld, Ereshkigal, is an invincible existence in the underworld. In the end, Roman added. In other words, only the living and I can ignore the suppression of the underworld's authority and cause harm to Ereshkigal. Matthew nodded. If that's the case, can't we enter the underworld to support them? Gudatsi suggested. However, Merlin shook his head again. Tachika, how can you be sure that you and Matthew will encounter the Villo first and not Ereshkigal? If it's just Matthew and Ereshkigal fighting alone, although the chances of winning are not zero, it's not high either. Also, don't forget that the two demonic beast commanders also fell into the underworld together. Merlin's words were like the last straw that broke the camel's back. Gudatsi didn't know what to say. At this time, Nawakamaru, who had been quiet for a while, spoke. If it's only you and Matthew, if you encounter any one of them, even if Sir Matthew's shield can defend against the opponent's attack, it's only a matter of time before you lose. After all, the demonic beast commanders don't just have pure strength. And if you encounter both of them at the same time. Although Nawakamaru didn't continue to speak, the result was inevitable death. As a surviving servant of the beheading operation, it can be said that I have a deeper understanding of the demonic beast commanders than you. Let's not talk about the lion-headed Wugger, the other demonic beast commander. Musamafu is not an ordinary person. It's not an existence that a servant can face alone. After Nawakamaru finished speaking, he walked directly toward the almost collapsed defensive barrier. I'm going to organize the soldiers and wait for the arrival of the Uruk's people before making a decision, and I believe that Sir Hyunryong will be fine. After Nawakamaru finished speaking and left, whether it was Gudatsi, Matthew, Roman, or Merlin, they didn't speak anymore, as if they were giving Gudatsi time to think. After a moment, Merlin opened his mouth. I'm also very worried about the Villo. After all, he is my close friend. However, worrying about him is useless. For now, we can only believe in the Villo. You must know that the Villo took the initiative to enter the underworld. Since he took the initiative to enter the underworld, then the Villo certainly won't make such a low-level mistake. Indeed, in the case of knowing that there is a tiger in the mountain, only those who had a card up their sleeves would do something like going to the tiger's mountain, otherwise it would be a waste. Wuming was certainly not a person who would do something for free. He must have his own considerations. I know, I'm just a little bit worried about Assassin. At that moment Gudatsi also recovered. Since it was already like this at this stage, then they should believe and wait. Chapter 923. Deep underground, in the underworld. After Ishtar's noble phantasm caused the earth to shake, the entrance to the underworld was opened. Wuming brought Ishtar into the underworld. When they arrived at a path that looked like a stone bridge, Wuming let go of Ishtar's ankle and took a deep breath. As expected, the place is filled with the aura of death. Not only that, it was dark everywhere. Along the way, there were 1 or 2 cages that looked like spears with a floating blue flame. The entire underworld was filled with darkness and faint blue light. Ouch, ouch, ouch. Ishtar was lying there in pain. She struggled to get up and held her head as if she was having a headache. After Ishtar was brought into the underworld by Wuming in a rather rough way, she had bumped into many things along the way. Ishtar's head was the most injured. When Wuming let go of Ishtar, Ishtar's head hit the ground first. As expected, I shouldn't have trusted your perverted character. Ishtar rubbed her head as she stared at Wuming fiercely. As Wuming used to deal with Ishtar, he knew her very well. Not only that, Ishtar also had to deal with Wuming. Indirectly, Ishtar also had a good understanding of Wuming. Ishtar already knew that this guy was a perverted person. Now, Ishtar had a deeper impression of Wuming's perverted interests. Ah, you despicable guy. You know that the underworld has a natural suppressive effect on the god. Why did you bring me in? Ishtar walked up to Wuming in a threatening manner, his eyes ferocious as he vented his grievances. Because we need to chase after the magical beast commander. Wuming naturally turned his head, spread his hands, and shrugged his shoulders with a helpless look. But why did you drag me in? Why don't you just come in yourself? Ishtar hugged her head with both hands. Her eyes were empty, as if she was in the depths of hell. Although the underworld was hell to Ishtar in a way, cough cough, I'm not feeling too well. Maybe it's because of the death aura in the underworld. That's all. I'm leaving now. You can deal with the matter of the beast commander yourself. To put it bluntly, Ishtar wanted to escape. However, Wuming would not let Ishtar escape. Ishtar, help me kill the commander of the magical beasts and investigate the situation of the goddess of the underworld, Ereshkigal. Buzz. Ishtar's body glowed with a red light as if she was under a command spell. That was the embodiment of the coercive power of the dependent contract. Yes. Yes. Ishtar, who was about to turn around and leave, turned around and answered with difficulty. Ah! Damn you, Hyunryong! After that, Ishtar knelt on the ground with her hands on the ground and let out a sorrowful cry that moved even the underworld. Wuming's command from the dependent incarnation was different from the command spell. The command spell's command would be resisted to varying degrees depending on the details, the magic power of the servant, and other factors. The longer the command spell was delayed, the effect of the command spell would gradually weaken. Although the effect of the command spell could not completely disappear, in the end, the servant would be able to control the command spell to the extent that it would not affect them. However, Wuming's command came from the dependent incarnation. Wuming's ability to control his dependent was absolute. However, because Wuming and Ishtar signed a contract related to the magical beasts, Wuming could only use the magical beasts as the main command to forcibly control Ishtar. Under the influence of Wuming's command, the current Ishtar had no way to leave the underworld. Only by completing the command issued by Wuming, Ishtar could leave the underworld. Although it was somewhat inconvenient to use the command related to the magical beasts to control Ishtar, there was no other way. The existence of Wuming's dependent was basically voluntary. Only Ishtar was tricked by Wuming to sign a temporary contract. That was to say, the contract between the two would be completely lifted after the magical beasts were eliminated and the goddess of magical beasts was defeated. It was basically impossible to make Ishtar sign a contract with Wuming from the bottom of her heart. If it was really possible to make Ishtar obediently sign a dependent contract from the bottom of her heart, then Ishtar would not be so naughty before. Although Wuming also considered setting a word trap to make Ishtar his dependent permanently, Wuming considered that the disadvantages of making Ishtar his dependent outweighed the advantages, so Wuming gave up on the idea. Although Ishtar was the mistress of the sky in Mesopotamia and was a rather powerful goddess, she was also a willful fool. If Wuming really used a word game to trick Ishtar and make her his dependent, it would certainly solve the problem of Ishtar's willfulness once and for all. However, if Wuming really did that, it would probably be enough for Wuming to suffer. In the end, Wuming would definitely end up tricking himself. Just the attributes of being a fool and a loser could make Wuming suffer. Through the past, Wuming was very sure of this. Let's go, Ishtar. We came to the underworld for business. After knocking Ishtar's head, Wuming took the lead and walked along the road. Damn it, I didn't want to come to the underworld. You were the one who dragged me here. Ishtar was now feeling very wronged. Why am I so unlucky to meet this guy, Hyunryong? God, Father God, where are you? Your daughter is now suffering under Hyunryong. Come and save your daughter. Ishtar, who was clearly a goddess, prayed to God. It was enough to see that Wuming was driving Ishtar crazy. Your father once asked me to take good care of you, and now I have a way to make you obedient. The way was of course referring to the dependent contract. Wuming turned around and looked at Ishtar, who was praying with her hands clasped together but was stunned by Wuming's words. I will teach you well during this time, stupid goddess Ishtar. In the end, Wuming gave Ishtar a rather pleasant smile, but this smile was like the smile of the devil in Ishtar's eyes. At this moment, before Ishtar could look forward to the cruel future, the roar of a magical beast came into their ears. Wuming and Ishtar looked at each other, both of their eyes were full of solemnity. Immediately, Wuming ran directly in the direction of the roar of the magical beast, and Ishtar had no time to look forward to the cruel future, and directly followed Wuming's footsteps. No matter what, dealing with the magical beast was the most important thing at the moment. Chapter 9:24. The one that roared must be the commander of the demonic beasts. There was no doubt about that. Not to mention that the mass-produced demonic beasts wouldn't be able to make such a loud roar. Even if there were some demonic beasts that weren't killed by Ishtar's noble phantasm and fell directly from the ground to the underworld, at such a height, even if it was a strengthened mass-produced demonic beast, it would still be severely injured. Moreover, it would only be a serious injury and not a light one. Perhaps, only the demonic beast commanders with extremely strong physiques could fall to the underworld unscathed. Then, what did the uninjured magical beast commander encounter that caused him to let out such a bluffing roar filled with shock and panic? The answer was that the demonic beast commanders were attacked by the garrulous spirit. The roads in the underworld went from the top to the bottom. They were all stone bridges that were naturally formed in the underworld. The stone bridges intersected with each other and extended downwards like a maze. But apart from that, there were also places where a few stone bridges converged to form a platform in the underworld. At this moment, Wuming and the rather reluctant Ishtar stood at the edge of a stone bridge and looked down at the platform that was formed by the stone bridges. There was a gigantic humanoid creature that was covered in red fur but had the head of a ferocious lion. It was one of the 11 demonic beast commanders, the lion-headed Wugger. Surrounding the tall Wugger was a group of skeletons with huge claws that didn't have legs. Their claws were as big as the heads of these skeletons. These skeletons were the garrulous spirit. The garrulous spirits emerged from all over the place and swarmed towards Wugger as if they had seen their enemy. Since these garrulous spirits had no legs and were in the underworld, they all floated in the air of the underworld. Because of this, these garrulous spirits were all over Wudgel's body. His head, back, legs, claws, and even the mane on his neck were all firmly grasped by the garrulous spirits with their giant claws. No matter how hard Wudgel struggled, he couldn't shake off the garrulous spirits. His physical attacks were basically useless against the garrulous spirits because they were spirit. Every time the garrulous spirit was torn apart by a claw, it would recover in less than a second. The garrulous spirit's claws, on the other hand, were firmly fixed on Ajar's body while constantly dealing damage to him. Claw marks appeared on Mount Wudgel, and traces of blood appeared on Wudgel's body, attracting even more garrulous spirits to swarm him. It had to be said that the demon commander's physique was truly tyrannical. If it were a servant, perhaps their spirit base would have already been forced to retreat after withstanding so many garrulous spirits' attacks. However, Wudger was still as lively as ever. Even the angry roar produced by the garrulous spirits was particularly powerful. The demon commander's physique is extremely strong, but it is precisely because of this that they appear to be in a predicament when facing spirits without a physical body. Like a commentator, Wuming said lightly, and Ishtar heard it clearly. However, Ishtar didn't care about it. But this is a demon commander that is comparable to the Father God. The implication was that only those ordinary mass-produced demons lacked the means to deal with spirit. For a demon commander that was not on the same level as a mass-produced demon commander, how could it only have an advantage in terms of physique? Wudjil is the lion of the sun. It certainly can't be that its physique is far beyond imagination. After Ishtar finished speaking, as if to reflect Ishtar's words, Wudjil finally stopped using its claws to deal with the garrulous spirits. Wudjil opened its mouth wide, and a sun-like radiance appeared in the underworld. In an instant, the garrulous spirits that were attacking Wudjil were stimulated and retreated. Some of the garrulous spirits that were particularly close to Wudjil even died from the intense radiance. In the next second, the radiance hidden in Wudjil's mouth turned into flames. The instant Wudjil swung its head to the surroundings, the flames were like rays that shot out in all directions. The fire of the sun engulfed a large number of garrulous spirits, and a large number of garrulous spirits perished in an instant in agony. Although the garrulous spirits didn't let out any screams due to the fact that they were spirits, it didn't affect Wudjil's mood at this moment. Roar! Wudjil let out a victorious roar, and its roar echoed throughout the underworld. Why aren't you going to attack? Now is a good opportunity to get rid of Wudjil, isn't it? Ishtar looked at Wuming. Although a sneak attack wasn't a good thing, this was war. In a war between humans and demons, the true essence of war was to win by any means necessary. Besides, demons didn't have human rights. A sneak attack would be over. However, Wuming still chose to wait and see. Don't worry, someone will come and take care of this guy. Just by killing a few garrulous spirits, it let out a triumphant roar that resounded throughout the underworld. Who did it think it was? It could only be said that this prototype Wudjil's brain wasn't as good as the prototype Ulidim that Wuming killed. It didn't understand whose territory it was. This was the territory of the underworld goddess, one of the three goddesses' alliance. The underworld goddess was an existence that was on par with the goddess of magical beasts. Demons of the goddess of magical beasts, why are you behaving so atrociously in my underworld? Why are you provoking me? The voice of a creator resounded throughout the underworld, and Wudjil subconsciously shut its mouth. Ishtar was so frightened that she trembled. At the same time, Ishtar also understood who Wuming was referring to when he said, "Someone will come and take care of Wudjil." It sounds a little like your voice. Wuming glanced at Ishtar. However, Ishtar rolled her eyes at Wuming. What nonsense are you talking about? This voice clearly belongs to Ereshkigal. Ishtar didn't want to talk about Ereshkigal. It could be said that other than Wuming, only Ereshkigal could give Ishtar a headache. After all, Ereshkigal had once stripped, pierced, and killed Ishtar when she was in the underworld. Before Ishtar could recall the past, Ereshkigal spoke again. Since you dare to behave atrociously in my underworld, prepare to die. Chapter 925. However, the words that sounded like a death sentence did not strike fear in Yukur. Although Wudjil had subconsciously shut its mouth, it did not mean that it was afraid. Perhaps this was what the saying, "the ignorant are fearless," meant. Roar! Perhaps Yukur's brain was really not working well. It actually roared at the majestic voice in the void, as if it was provoking it. Is it crazy? Wuming, who could understand the language of the monsters, naturally knew what Yukur was doing. After translating and subtracting the profanities, it was more or less, bring it on. But Emir Yukar actually dared to challenge the goddess of the underworld alone? Both Wuming and Ishtar knew that Yukar would die without a doubt. As expected, after Wujal let out a roar, black and gray stone pillars rose from the ground at irregular angles, as if they were dead. They firmly restrained Wujal's limbs. Although the sudden restriction gave Wujal a fright, he did not show any signs of panic or any other emotions. Wujal actually used brute force to break the rock pillar into pieces. Roar! Yukar stomped on the rock pillars until they were crushed under its feet. Then, it let out another roar of victory. This guy is definitely done for. Ishtar could not bear to look at the scene in front of him. To provoke Ereshki Gale in such a manner, if the original Yukar was supposed to die, then perhaps even its soul would be shattered by Ereshki Gale. As the other half of Ereshkigal and Ishtar's trip to the underworld, Ishtar understood Ereshkigal quite well. After Wugal let out what he thought was a victorious roar, but it was actually a declaration before his death. More rock pillars rose from the ground and restrained Wugal's body and limbs. However, after being restrained once again, Wujal was still about to use his brute force to break free. At that moment, the rock pillars instantly exploded and were replaced by spears of light. At the same time, they replaced the rock pillars to restrain Wujal's body even more. That's Ereshkigal's spear. Ishtar frowned at the scene as if she recalled something bad. However, the light spears were no different from the rock pillars to Yukar. It was just a matter of whether they looked good or not. However, just as Wujal was about to use the brute strength his mother had bestowed upon him to break free from the spears of light, a large number of new spears of light instantly appeared on the spears of light. They pierced into Wujal's flesh, causing him to cry out in pain. Roar, roar, roar. The light spears didn't miss a single part of Yukar's body. From top to bottom, head, neck, shoulders, chest, back, waist, abdomen, legs, knees, arms and joints, they didn't miss a single spot. And because they pierced into Yukar's limbs, waist, and abdomen, Yukar's brute force was sealed and he couldn't use it anymore. I didn't expect Yukar to be able to withstand this attack. From Ishtar's point of view, being pierced by these light spears in the underworld was basically equivalent to death. But Yukar relied on the strength of his body to prevent all the light spears from piercing into his body. I have to say, I really can't underestimate a magical beast commander. Ishtar's expression turned grave. She finally understood how powerful a magical beast commander was. If she were in Wujal's shoes, her spirit base wouldn't be able to withstand these spears of light without any defenses. She would have been pierced in an instant. It could only be said that one of the magical beast commanders, the original Wugal, was not very smart. Otherwise, with such a powerful physique, it would have been able to escape from the underworld before Ereshki Gale made his move. But this Yukar was like a stubborn donkey. He didn't have the slightest intention to beg for mercy or repent. Instead, he opened his mouth and condensed the light of the sun again. Yukar's eyes were filled with the desire to kill and take revenge. How could this guy still want revenge in such a situation? Did he become arrogant because he didn't die time and time again? Or was Yukar really that confident in himself? Wuming felt that it was the former. No, this wasn't a problem of arrogance or confidence. To be more precise, it should be a problem with Yukar's brain. In the legends, it was described that Tiamat's son, Kingu, led the magical beasts to fight against the gods. The reason why Kingu led the magical beasts was probably because the magical beasts sired by Tiamat weren't intelligent enough. Wu Ming guessed that the reason why the demonic beasts lost was probably because there was a problem with their IQ. This might be the price to pay for obtaining great power. Tiamat's 11 sons are probably lacking in intelligence. Wuming shook his head regretfully. But then, for some reason, Wuming's nose suddenly itched and he looked like he was about to sneeze. This gave Ishtar a fright. She hurriedly slapped Wuming's mouth. Wuming stared at Ishtar. His eyes conveyed the meaning of "you've got guts." But Ishtar stared back at Wuming. "Don't drop the ball at this time." Ishtar looked at Wuming with a dissatisfied expression. Just as Wu Ming was about to have a problem, Wu Jier also had a problem. In the next second, a garrulous spirit that was several times larger than the other garrulous spirits, and about the same size as Yukur, appeared above Yukur. This garrulous spirit held a huge, slender spear of light and slowly raised it high. Die. The garrulous spirit, who issued the majestic voice of Ereshki Gal, was like the grim reaper who granted equal death to the people of the world. It raised its spear of light high up in the air and thrust it at Yugur. At this moment, Yukur finally sensed danger. If the spear of light pierced him from above, he would not be able to survive. As for whether he could pierce through its skull, Wujel didn't have the slightest confidence this time, because Wujel recognized that the huge garrulous spirit above its head was actually the goddess of the underworld herself. The spear of light in her hand was a genuine artifact that far surpassed the toughness of a magical beast's body. Roar! A beastly howl came from Yukur's mouth. It seemed that Yukur had sensed that true death was approaching. Poochie! Chapter 926. Blood splattered all over the rock platform, and a jar stopped moving. Wuming, who had witnessed such a cruel scene, did not do anything. Ishtar, who did move, only felt pity for Ajar's intelligence. No wonder these demonic beast commanders have not taken down the humans even after 3 months. It's because of their intelligence. Ishtar had to admit that King Gilgamesh was indeed a virtuous king, but the intelligence of the demonic beast commanders was also a major factor that affected the demonic beast battlefront. Alright, the demonic beast commanders have been eliminated. Let's go, Ishtar said, and wanted to leave quietly without alerting Ereshkigal. But, haven't you noticed? We've been discovered long ago. Wuming looked at Ishtar in disdain. Wuming felt that Ishtar's intelligence was on par with the demonic beast commanders, as expected of an idiotic goddess. Is that so? But, at this point, Ishtar also noticed the problem. After Ereshkigal's giant garrulous spirit killed Ajar, and absorbed his soul into the spear of light in her hand, she stood still and looked at Wuming and Ishtar. Although there were a lot of rocks covering the two of them, there was no doubt that Ereshki Gal had discovered them. Ereshkigal is the mistress of the underworld. You can say that when we entered the underworld, Ereshkigal already knew. As the only god in the underworld, Ereshki Gal's authority was beyond imagination. But that was all. That's true. Ishtar's shoulders drooped helplessly, and she looked powerless. Ereshkigal only spoke after Ishtar showed a powerless look, as if she was waiting to see Ishtar make a fool of herself. Uruk Yunryong, mistress of the sky Ishtar, I already know why you are here. The demonic beast Ajar has been killed by me, and the other demonic beast Musamafu has escaped from the underworld. There is nothing you want here, leave quickly. Wuming could not help but have a trace of doubt. Wuming also guessed that Ereshkigal might not attack him and Ishtar, but Wuming did not expect Ereshkigal to let him and Ishtar leave just like that. Obviously, the other party was a member of the Three Goddesses Alliance. Obviously, the other party was a goddess who was hostile to humans. How could she let them go so easily? Obviously, they were on the side of humans. How could she let them go so easily? Damn it! Just listening to Ereshkigal's arrogant tone made Ishtar quite angry. However, Ishtar's brain was not as bad as Ajar's. At that moment, Ishtar pulled Wuming's arm. You see, Ereshkigal also let us leave, let's go. However, Wuming was not moved, because Wuming came to the underworld not only to eliminate the demonic beast commander. Wuming's order to Ishtar was also very clear. Eliminate the demonic beast and investigate the underworld goddess. It's not easy to have the opportunity to get in touch with Ereshkigal. You can leave first. Wuming's order to Ishtar to eliminate the demonic beast commander had been completed, so the power from the dependence that restricted Ishtar from leaving the underworld had disappeared, and Ishtar could leave the underworld now. You want to face Ereshkigal alone? The original whisper was also raised a few decibels because of surprise. Hey! Although I don't want to admit it, you are the strongest on our side, right? How can you face one of the three goddesses' alliance alone? What if something happens? Ishtar lowered her voice as much as possible and leaned over Wuming's ear and nagged. However, the response to Ishtar was Wuming's palm. I actually let an idiot like you worry about me, how embarrassing. Wuming's palm pressed onto Ishtar's beautiful face, which could be considered as a response to Ishtar's previous slap on his face. Damn. I'm not worried about you. I'm just worried. If you die, my reward will go down the drain. Ishtar struggled to pull Wuming's hand up from her face while looking for an excuse for herself like a proud textbook. Helplessly smiling, Wuming finally persuaded Ishtar to leave. You should go back to the surface first. I'm a little worried about the escaped Musu Mafu. Ereshkigal would not lie about this kind of thing, so the other demonic beast commander Musu Mafu must have escaped. Looks like the demonic beast commander is not completely brainless like Wugger. At least the demonic beast commander Musu Mafu would escape, unlike the stubborn Wugger. In the end, Ishtar also compromised. I know, you be careful. After Ishtar finished speaking, she summoned the heavenly ship's horse Anna, placed her hand on the horse Anna, and Ishtar slowly rose. No matter what, since Ereshkigal is willing to let us leave, it probably means that she doesn't have any ill intentions towards us. However, when she said this, Ishtar felt awkward. How could Ereshkigal not have any ill intentions towards her? In short, you should be careful with your words, there shouldn't be any danger. You are the god that Enkidu once believed in, even if it's because of Enkidu who treated Ereshkigal with respect, she will still let you go. I know, you should leave quickly. I am your senior in terms of seniority. How can a junior instruct a senior? You, on the other hand, don't be ambushed by another demonic beast commander when you pass through the exit that connects the underworld to the surface. Musu Mafu must have escaped from the entrance to the underworld, which was the collapsed ground that Ishtar blasted open. It was impossible for it to escape from other places. I know? What a hateful guy, nagging like an old man. So what if you are my senior? Ishtar turned her head and left angrily. Old man. Wuming subconsciously touched his chin. Although he looked young and was definitely much younger than Ishtar, he was someone who was on the same level as Ishtar's father, the main god of Sumer, and in short, he would definitely take advantage of Ishtar. What else do you want, Uruk Hyunryong? The conversation between Wuming and Ishtar was actually being monitored by Ereshkigal. Although she was still speechless towards Ishtar, Ereshkigal was more concerned about why Wuming was looking for her. Ereshkigal knew that the reason Wuming was looking for her was definitely not as simple as the reason that Wuming used to brush off Ishtar. Ereshkigal, Enkidu's tomb is still there, right? Chapter 927. That's right. Wuming cared about nothing else but Enkidu's tomb. According to Gilgamesh of this world, after Enkidu of this world died, because Enkidu treated Ereshkigal with respect when he was alive, his corpse was buried in the underworld by Ereshkigal. In the Mesopotamia of the parallel world that Wuming experienced, Enkidu's soul was preserved by Wuming, and his corpse was given to Gilgamesh to deal with. It was probably buried in the underworld as well. After all, regardless of which world Enkidu was in, he respected Ereshkigal. Enkidu's tomb? The huge garrulous spirit that Ereshkigal transformed into shook its body and rejected Wuming in the end. Why should I tell thee? As it spoke, the huge garrulous spirit's skeleton emitted a scarlet and terrifying light as if it was angry. I allowed you to leave because you only entered the underworld to hunt down magical beasts and didn't behave atrociously. I haven't even punished you for the crime of exploding the sky of my underworld. However, Wu-Ming was not flustered at all. After the gods disappeared, the underworld should have disappeared as well. It's only because of your reappearance that the underworld returned with you. However, the underworld that returned with you should only be a part of it. Hearing this, the huge garrulous spirit maintained its fierce posture, but it did not continue with its next move. Wu-Ming was right. If it was the underworld of the past, it would have spread throughout the entire Mesopotamia. However, after the gods disappeared, the mysterious existence of the underworld also disappeared. However, because Ereshkigal descended as a servant, as a goddess who could not leave the underworld naturally appeared with Ereshkigal. However, because it was an accessory of Ereshkigal, the underworld didn't appear as widely as before. You've guessed correctly. The underworld is indeed limited to Khazar City and the surrounding areas. Ereshkigal admitted to it. Coincidentally, Khazar City was located in the northwest of Uruk. It was near the place where Ishtar had blown up half of the plains with her relic. That was why the underground of that place was connected to the underworld. And seeing Ereshkigal admit it, Wu-Ming also gave an answer to this problem. If that's the case, you can move the underworld. That way, the entrance that was blasted open will no longer be an entrance. It will just be an ordinary hole. If it was only a part of the underworld, Ereshkigal could move it with her authority. Although the process might be slow and long, Ereshkigal could do it. Why should I choose to give in? The gigantic garrulous spirit that represented Ereshkigal was a little annoyed. Wasn't it the same as asking Ereshkigal to move a part of the underworld that came with her? Wasn't it the same as asking Ereshkigal to show that she couldn't defeat it? I'm doing this for your sake, Ereshkigal. Don't forget about the monster that escaped. It will definitely report the general location of the underworld to the goddess of magical beasts. It's a terrible thing for the base camp to be discovered, isn't it? This made Ereshkigal fall into deep thought. Indeed, because of its body, Musu Maf didn't fall directly into the depths of the underworld like usual. Instead, it fell very close to the ground. Moreover, it had a snake body, so it quickly climbed up the cliff and escaped from the underworld. If it really returned to the northern fir forest, it would definitely know about the situation in the underworld. In a situation where he was unable to leave the underworld, and the opponent still had several magical beast commanders with extremely strong physiques, Ereshkigal would indeed be at a disadvantage. Although Ereshkigal knew that the goddess of magical beasts' base camp was in the fir forest, she couldn't leave the underworld. It was only a few nights ago that she could use Ishtar's body, which represented her, to walk on the ground. Now that Ishtar was with Wu-Ming and the others, the idea of using Ishtar's body to walk on the ground had become unrealistic. After saying so much, aren't you still thinking for the sake of humans? Although she didn't know why Wu-Ming would suggest that Ereshkigal move the underworld, Wu-Ming's actions were definitely not harmful to humans. Even if it wasn't for the sake of humans, it definitely wouldn't affect humans. Today, I will tell you that my underworld has already begun to expand and move. Once it succeeds, I will capture all the souls of humans and bring them to my underworld. I will build a kingdom of the dead filled with souls. In other words, you are protecting humans in disguise. Wu-Ming's words stunned Ereshkigal, and she didn't know what to say. If it were any other gods other than the few Sumer gods who truly love humans who say that they want to protect humans, I might be suspicious. However, if it's you, Ereshkigal, I'm willing to believe it. Ereshkigal had been in the underworld since she was born until the gods retreated and the gods disappeared. It could be said that she didn't have much contact with the outside world. Moreover, because of her fixed position, Ereshkigal didn't have any thoughts of fighting for a god's position. She had been diligently taking care of the underworld. How could a god like her, who was destined to be restricted for her entire life, have any desire? Humans were born with good natures. It was the same for gods. A god who was set up after birth and didn't have much contact with the outside world didn't seem like a god who would harm humans. Although Wuming had never met Ereshkigal before, Wuming believed that Ereshkigal, who had been diligently taking care of the underworld for her entire life, wouldn't become an existence that opposed Mesopotamia. Most importantly, Ereshkigal buried Enkidu's body in the underworld because Enkidu treated her with respect. A god who could make Enkidu treat her with respect couldn't possibly be an evil god, right? What are you saying? The huge garrulous spirit's tone suddenly changed. This made Wuming jump and he froze on the spot. This voice was almost exactly the same as Ishtar's. However, there was a shyness in this voice that Ishtar didn't have. Ereshkigal, who realized that something was wrong, immediately adjusted herself. Ahem. Anyway, my underworld will be decided by me. I will send the garrulous spirit and thou to guide the way. Once you're done inspecting Enkidu's tomb, leave immediately. As soon as she finished speaking, the huge garrulous spirit turned into a blood-red liquid and melted into the rocks of the underworld, disappearing. Chapter 928. Sure enough, there's more to it. If Wuming was only guessing about Ereshkigal before, then now Wuming was sure about Ereshkigal. He was sure that Ereshkigal was on the side of humans. However, Ereshkigal deviated from the right path. In a sense, she was an enemy of humans. However, as long as her thoughts were for humans, there was a way to change her. This can be considered another breakthrough point for the three goddesses' alliance after Quizzer. If the goddess of the underworld also defected, two pillars of the three goddesses' alliance would be on Wuming's side. Then, the three goddesses' alliance would really exist in name only. In this way, humans could also deal with the goddess of warcraft with peace of mind. However, Ereshkigal seemed to be quite extreme. It was better not to be too anxious. At that moment, Wuming decided to investigate Enkidu's tomb in this world first, and then make a decision about the next action. As early as the huge garrulous spirit transformed by Ereshkigal disappeared, a garrulous spirit the size of an ordinary person emerged from the crack of the rock and walked to Wuming. It stopped in place and seemed to be waiting for Wuming. Let's go, take me to Enkidu's tomb. Although Wuming felt a little awkward, he felt a little sorry for Enkidu at that moment. The garrulous spirit turned around silently and floated in a certain direction. Over there. After looking at his general direction, Wuming followed the garrulous spirit. After all, Wuming still had to go back the way he came. The garrulous spirit's speed wasn't slow, but Wuming was able to keep up, so Wuming soon arrived in front of Enkidu's tomb. It was a small stone platform with empty spear cages around it. Chains wrapped around the spear cages and surrounded this place. It should be like this. At this moment, in Wuming's eyes, the spear cages around Enkidu's tomb were all crooked, and some were even pulled out. The chains around the spear cages were also violently broken and scattered on the ground. In the center of the stone platform, there was a pit that seemed to have been dug by a beast. Anyone could see that what was originally buried in this pit must be Enkidu's body, or the god's soil. As expected, Enkidu, your body in this world is gone. As if receiving instructions, golden light spots of light appeared on Wuming's body. A silver chain appeared and wrapped around Wing's arms and waist. Clank clank, the chains clanged against each other, as if they were responding to Wu Ming. Did the demonic beasts do this? Or did Gitia's minions do this? The traces left behind told Wuming that the one who took away Enkidu's corpse wasn't an elegant person. To be able to leave behind such a messy scene, It was either a monster without much rationality or one of Gaia's minions, one of the 72 demons. After all, from the appearance of Enkidu on the side of the demonic beasts and the fact that Enkidu's body was stolen, the other party was definitely not on the side of humans. But after thinking about it carefully, Wu-Ming rejected both possibilities. "I'm afraid Gaia did it herself." "Master, why are you so sure?" At this time, Wu-Ming's head lit up. The seemingly ordinary dragon horn headpiece made a sound. "Because the timeline doesn't match," Wu-Ming casually answered Callis, and then explained to her in detail. The demonic beasts were produced by the goddess of demonic beasts, and Enkidu obviously appeared together with the goddess of demonic beasts, so it was unlikely that the goddess of demonic beasts did it. The demon god pillars could appear in various eras of human history and disrupt those eras, making those eras become singularities. It seemed like they traveled through time and space, but if observed carefully, those eras were all after the Magic King's era. The demon god pillars were passed down from generation to generation. When they reached a certain era, they would awaken and disrupt human history. "Master, how do you know this?" Callis was puzzled. "Because, when I was in Atlas Courtyard, I met Sherlock Holmes." At that time, when Guidazzi, Matthew, and Leonardo da Vinci were brought into Atlas Courtyard by Sherlock Holmes, Wu-Ming followed behind them. When Guidazzi, Matthew, and Leonardo da Vinci left Atlas Courtyard, Sherlock Holmes, who had already deduced that Wu-Ming would come, had a conversation with Wu-Ming in Atlas Courtyard. The reason why Wu-Ming appeared behind Guidazzi and others was because Wu-Ming had just come out of Atlas Courtyard. After all, the other party is a detective, and he even used a three-pointed Hermes. There were some things that I needed his help with, so I went to look for him. At that time, Callis fell into the box world with Wu-Ming's body, so it was normal that she didn't know about these things. If Callis was here, there would be no need for Callis at all. Callis' database is 100 times stronger than a detective's brain. Callis' tone was a little sour. Indeed, if Callis had followed Wu-Ming the whole time, with Callis' ability, there would be no problem answering Wu-Ming's questions through every little thing along the way. Unfortunately, Callis wasn't by Wu-Ming's side at that time. Helpless, Wu-Ming could only ask Wu-Ming for help. "It's just a coincidence that you weren't here. Don't be jealous, my exclusive magic costume is lapis lazuli, Callis Barrett." At that moment, Callis didn't speak anymore, as if she was shy. But a shy magic costume. It could only be said that it was indeed the work of Gemstone Master, and the emotional system was also at the peak of its level. In short, including Winterwood City, the first 7 singularities were all created by a technique called the Demon God Pillar that was hidden in the human genes and passed down to a fixed age. In this year 2655 BC, the Demon God Pillar couldn't have appeared no matter what, so this singularity could only be handled by Gydia personally. Although Gydia could also teleport the Demon God Pillar to this singularity, Wu-Ming's intuition told him that this singularity was set up by Gydia without anyone else's help. Then, in other words, Enkidu's body might be the real Enkidu. The silver chain on Wu-Ming's hand couldn't help but shake, as if it was angry that its body was being used by the enemy. Gently pacifying the restless silver chain, Wu-Ming fell into deep thought as he recalled the past. No wonder that Enkidu had a strange reaction when it saw me. Perhaps Enkidu's body affected the unknown soul within. At that moment, Wu-Ming revealed a smile. But, since it's the real Enkidu in a certain sense, it's very advantageous for us. Because the only god that Enkidu believed in and served was the Uruk Hyunryong, which was also Wu-Ming himself. Chapter 929. After Wu-Ming finished investigating Enkidu, he came to the surface from the underworld through the ground that was blown up by Ishtar. Putting the fake Enkidu aside, Guidazzi, Matthew, and the others were still on the surface. Although Merlin was there, and Gudatsi and Matthew wouldn't go to the underworld to find him, they definitely wouldn't leave. Maybe they were still waiting for him nearby. No matter what, he had to go up and say hello and then go back to Uruk. And Wuming hadn't gone back to Uruk since he returned to Mesopotamia. It would be good to report to Gilgamesh about Enkidu. Standing at the edge of the collapsed ground, Wuming looked back at the huge crater behind him and nodded. This way, the demonic beasts can be prevented from coming here. It was an unexpected surprise. After all, the surrounding area had collapsed, and the demonic beasts couldn't choose to enter the underworld and then climb up. That was equivalent to provoking Ereshkigal, and they would definitely be killed. While Wuming was talking, the girl's excited voice came from behind him. "Assassin!" Wuming turned his head and saw Gudatsi running while waving at him, and Matthew was behind her with a panicked face. For a moment, Matthew, who was a demi-servant, couldn't catch up with Gudatsi, who was an ordinary human. "Senpai, please slow down?" When she was close to Wuming, Gudatsi suddenly flew toward Wuming. Wuming quickly opened his hands, took a few steps forward, and caught Gudatsi. "Assassin! Are you okay?" Gudatsi looked worried. However, Wuming knocked Gudatsi's little head. "If you're so impatient, I'll be in trouble." Senior ha. Matthew, who came to the two of them, was panting heavily and looked quite uncomfortable. Because he was too anxious to catch up with Gudatsi, Matthew didn't have much time to catch his breath. "Look at you, Matthew. Don't do this again." Wuming immediately let go of Gudatsi, and went to Matthew's back to rub Matthew's back. He then injected his mana into Matthew's body to relieve Matthew's fatigue. "I'm sorry, Matthew. I was too anxious." Gudatsi also came over to apologize to Matthew. When she found out that Wuming's spirit base was nearby, she immediately ran over. It's okay, Senior. I understand that you're worried about Vi. Senior Villo." Although he was relieved, Matthew was still panting heavily. It seemed that he needed a little rest. "Tachika, you should calm down in the future. A demonic beast commander escape. If you're so rash, it will be troublesome if it ambushes you halfway." Gudatsi didn't care about anything just now. After receiving the news that Wuming appeared here, she directly ran over. Matthew was also worried about Gudatsi's safety, so he was out of breath and followed her. "Don't worry about that. The demonic beast commander has left." A voice came from behind Wuming. Wuming turned his head and saw that it was Ishtar. "You're okay? That's great." Wuming's tone was rather flat as he nodded. Ishtar knew very well what Wuming meant by "nothing happened." Wuming meant that Ishtar was not ambushed by the demonic beast commander. However, knowing was one thing, but Wuming's perfunctory attitude made Ishtar quite unhappy. "You bastard! I was worried that Ereshkigal would imprison you in the underworld, and you're actually looking forward to something happening to me?" At that moment, Ishtar was like an angry cat, staring fiercely at Wuming. Miss Ishtar was indeed ambushed by Musu Maf nearby, but because we were all stationed not far away, nothing happened to Ishtar. Matthew, who had recovered his breath, also began to explain. Who would have thought that that guy was actually hiding underground? It actually managed to hide such a huge thing. Ishtar became irritated at the thought of this. It could be said that if it weren't for Wuming's reminder, she would have been eaten by Musu Maf by now. Devouring a god would bring about considerable growth for a demonic beast. It was the same reason why Ulidim wanted to devour Wuming. It was no wonder that Musu Maf would hide and wait like a sinister viper. Sure enough, the demonic beast commander isn't all brainless. After all, those brainless demonic beast commanders were most likely dead, and the remaining ones were probably some meticulous fellows. Wuming couldn't help but become serious. "I'm sorry, Ishtar. It's my mistake. I should have let you leave with me." Wuming really didn't expect that Musu Maf would actually ambush here. The reason why he said, demonic beasts might ambush, was just to scare Ishtar and Gudatsi. After all, those who escaped in such a situation would definitely choose to leave. In the end, Musu Maf actually chose to ambush them. It could only be said that Musu Maf was bold enough. If Wuming and Ishtar were to come out together, and if Wuming were to find out, Musu Maf would definitely follow in his footsteps today. Wuming couldn't let the tiger return to the mountain, no matter what. Wuming really regretted that he didn't let Ishtar stay a little longer. Wuming's regretful expression in Ishtar's eyes turned into self-blame for her danger, which made Ishtar didn't know what to say for a while. Wuming apologizing to Ishtar in such a serious way was really rare for Ishtar. It could be said that it was basically impossible for such a situation to happen. The relationship between the two was actually not that bad, but basically every time they met, they would have to mock and ridicule each other. It had almost become a habit. Ishtar was also affected by the girl's body this time as a pseudo-servant, so she didn't quarrel with Wuming. However, Wuming wasn't a pseudo-servant, and he wasn't affected by it. How could he apologize so easily? This made Ishtar feel quite awkward. At the moment, Ishtar also began to speak hesitantly. This is not your fault after all. You also told me. If I could come out with you, I would definitely not let Musumafu escape. I really missed a great opportunity to kill another demonic beast commander. Wuming clenched his left fist and hammered his right hand, directly interrupted Ishtar's speech, and his expression became even more regretful. As the saying goes, the more you think about it, the angrier you get. The more you take a step back, the more you think about it. Wuming's current state was more or less the same. However, Wuming's words made Ishtar, Gudatsi, and Matthew stunned on the spot. The meaning of Wuming's words was already very obvious. He wasn't worried about Ishtar, but he regretted missing the opportunity to kill the demonic beast commander. Gudatsi and Matthew couldn't help but swallow their saliva, silently looking at Ishtar, who had lowered her head and exuded a terrifying aura. Sure enough, Ishtar also lived up to everyone's expectations and shouted out what Gudatsi and Matthew thought was right at the moment. "You bastard!" You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.